The wind off the Montana plains cut through Evelyn's worn dress like it had a personal grudge. February 1891, and the cold didn't care that she'd already lost everything that mattered. She stood on the auction platform in the center of Redemption's town square, her 5 children pressed against her like they could somehow disappear into her shadow. They couldn't. Everyone was looking. The platform wasn't meant for people. Last month they'd sold farm equipment here. The month before that, horses. Today, Sheriff Doyle had decided it would do just fine for a widow and her children who couldn't pay their debts. "Lot 47, the auctioneer called out, his voice echoing off the false front buildings that lined the square. His name was Gideon March, and Evelyn had served him pie at her kitchen table more times than she could count. He wouldn't meet her eyes now. One widow woman, strong back, good cook, 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls, ages 13 down to 4, suitable for household or ranch work. Evelyn's hands trembled, but she forced them still. She wouldn't give them that. Not the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Mama?" Her youngest Clara tugged at her skirt. 4 years old and still believing mothers could fix anything. "Why are all those people staring?" "Hush now, baby." Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Just stay close to me." 13-year-old Thomas pressed forward, his father's jaw already showing in his young face. "This is wrong! Pa would never—" "Thomas." Evelyn's hand on his shoulder was gentle but firm. "Not now." But Thomas was past listening. "Pa built our ranch with his own hands. That land is ours. We don't owe nothing to nobody." In the crowd, Caleb Mercer shifted his weight, and the movement drew Evelyn's attention like a moth to flame. He stood near the front, close enough that she could see the satisfaction in his eyes, close enough that he wanted her to see it. Caleb Mercer owned half the territory and wanted the other half. He dressed like a gentleman in his wool coat and beaver hat, but Evelyn had learned the hard way that fine clothes didn't make a fine man. 3 months ago, her husband Daniel had ridden out to check fence lines and never came home. They'd found him 2 days later at the bottom of Copper Ridge, his neck broken, his horse grazing nearby. Accident, the sheriff had ruled. Tragic accident. A week after they buried Daniel, Caleb had shown up at her door with papers. Legal documents that said Daniel had borrowed $15,000 and put up the ranch as collateral. Documents with Daniel's signature at the bottom, though Evelyn would swear on her children's lives that her husband had never signed anything of the sort. "I'm sorry for your loss," Caleb had said, standing in her doorway like he owned it, which, according to his papers, he did. "But business is business, Mrs. Hart. I'm sure you understand." She'd had 30 days to pay. 30 days to come up with money she didn't have, could never have. Caleb had made sure every bank in the territory knew not to loan her a cent. Now here she stood, with her children about to be scattered to whoever had the money to buy them. "Do I hear 1,000 for the lot?" Gideon's voice cracked slightly on the words. The crowd murmured, but no hands went up. 1,000 was steep for a widow and 5 hungry mouths. "Come now, gentlemen," Gideon pressed. "Strong boys, good for ranch work. The woman's a fine cook, everyone knows it. The girls will grow into good help." "Split the lot," someone called from the back. Evelyn couldn't see who. "I'll give you 400 for the oldest boy." Thomas went rigid under her hand. 300 for the widow," another voice. This one she recognized, Frank Peterson, who owned the general store. His wife had died last year. He needed someone to cook and clean and warm his bed, probably, though he'd dress it up as charity. 200 for the 2 younger boys together. That was Bill Henderson, who ran cattle south of town and worked his hands half to death. The bids came faster now, the crowd warming to it like they were at the horse races instead of tearing apart what was left of her family. Evelyn felt Clara's grip tighten on her skirt. The little girl was crying, silent tears that tracked through the dust on her face. Margaret, age 7, stood stone still between her brothers. She hadn't cried since the funeral. Evelyn worried about that, about what it meant when a 7-year-old girl forgot how to cry. 9-year-old James kept his head down, studying the platform boards like they held answers. Her quietest child, the one who disappeared into books when the world got too loud. And Thomas. Thomas was 3 seconds from doing something that would get him hurt or worse. 1,500, Caleb's voice cut through the chaos. For the woman and the 2 older boys. The crowd went quiet. 1,500 was serious money. Gideon's gavel hesitated in midair. That's not the whole lot, Mr. Mercer. I don't need the whole lot. Caleb's smile didn't reach his eyes. The woman's strong. The older boys will make good ranch hands in a few years. The little ones will just eat me out of house and home. No. The word tore out of Evelyn before she could stop it. You can't. We stay together. Caleb looked at her for the first time since she'd been forced onto the platform. You're in no position to make demands, Mrs. Hart, unless you found $15,000 in the last 3 months. The crowd laughed. Actually laughed, like this was entertainment instead of the destruction of a family. Mr. Mercer's bid is $1,500 for the woman and 2 older boys, Gideon announced, his voice barely audible. Do I hear... Mama, no! Thomas moved fast, faster than Evelyn could grab him. He vaulted off the platform and hit the ground running, straight toward Caleb Mercer. Thomas, stop! But Thomas was past hearing, past thinking. He had his father's size already, and all of his father's rage at injustice, and none of his father's caution. He covered the distance to Caleb in seconds, his fist already drawn back. He never landed the punch. Sheriff Doyle stepped in and caught Thomas's arm, twisting it behind the boy's back hard enough to make him cry out. Attempted assault? Doyle said calmly. Boy's got a violent streak. Might need time in a cell to cool off. He's 13 years old. Evelyn was moving, climbing down from the platform with her skirts tangled around her legs. Let him go. Stay where you are, Mrs. Hart. Doyle's free hand went to his gun, not drawing it, just resting there. A warning. You've got no rights here. You're property now, same as those children. Property. The word hit like a physical blow. Evelyn had been born free, had married a good man, had raised children in a house they'd built with their own hands. And now, because a rich man wanted her land and had the means to take it, she was property. Margaret made a small sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a gasp. James had his arms around Clara, trying to shield her from seeing their brother pinned by the sheriff. Perhaps, a new voice said from somewhere behind the crowd, we should reconsider the bidding. Everyone turned. Evelyn couldn't see past the wall of bodies, but the crowd parted like water, and a man walked through. He was tall, built lean like he'd spent years working hard and eating light. His coat was worn but clean, his hat pulled low enough to shadow his face. He moved with the kind of quiet confidence that came from being dangerous and knowing it, the kind of man who didn't need to prove anything because everyone could already see it. Who the hell are you? Caleb's smooth veneer cracked slightly. The stranger stopped a few feet from the platform. When he looked up, Evelyn saw eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue, cold, and unreadable. Rowan Creed, his voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. I'm here to make a bid. Bidding's closed, Caleb said quickly. I've offered 1,500, 20,000. Rowan said it like he was ordering coffee, not offering a fortune. For the whole family, together. The crowd erupted. Gideon dropped his gavel. Even Sheriff Doyle forgot about Thomas long enough that the boy twisted free and scrambled back toward the platform. That's... Gideon fumbled for his gavel, found it, nearly dropped it again. That's... Mr. Creed, that's an extraordinary sum. I'm good for it. Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. Bank draft from First Continental in Helena. You can verify it if you want, but I'd rather not stand here freezing while you do. Caleb's face had gone dark red. This is absurd. Nobody pays $20,000 for a widow and 5 children. What's your game? Rowan looked at him, and something passed between them, something Evelyn couldn't read but that made Caleb take a half step back. No game, Rowan said. I need ranch hands, the whole family or nothing. Mama? Thomas had made it back to her, was pressed against her side. Who is he? I don't know, baby. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. 20,000. No one paid 20,000 for workers. No one. Which meant Rowan Creed wanted something else. Something worse. And Evelyn had just run out of choices. The bid is 20,000 for the complete lot, Gideon announced, his voice shaking. Going once? Going twice? Caleb looked like he might actually explode. This is a farce. I want to see that bank draft verified. Feel free. Rowan tossed the envelope to Sheriff Doyle, who caught it reflexively. I'll wait. The next 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Evelyn stood on that platform with her children pressed around her while Sheriff Doyle and Gideon March and half the town council huddled together, examining Rowan's papers. The stranger himself stood apart from the crowd, not engaging, not explaining, just waiting with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. "Mama, I'm scared." Clara's voice was very small. "I know, sweetheart." Evelyn gathered her daughter close. "I know." "Is he buying us?" Margaret asked, 7 years old and already understanding too much. "Like the horses?" Evelyn wanted to lie, to soften it somehow, but she'd never lied to her children and wouldn't start now. "Yes." "Are we slaves now?" James, always thinking, always working things through. "No." Evelyn said it firmly, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. "Nobody can make you a slave. Not anymore. Not ever." "Then what are we?" Thomas's voice had gone flat, defeated. 13 years old and learning that the world was crueler than he'd imagined. "We're hearts," Evelyn said, putting steel in her voice she didn't feel. "We're your father's children, and we don't break. No matter what comes, we don't break. You understand me?" 5 pairs of eyes stared up at her. 5 children who deserved better than this. Better than a mother who couldn't protect them. Better than standing on an auction block in the frozen town square. "I understand, Mama," Thomas said finally. The others nodded. "The bank draft is genuine." Sheriff Doyle's announcement cut through the murmuring crowd. $20,000 drawn on Mr. Rowan Creed's account at First Continental Bank, Helena Branch. Gideon raised his gavel one more time. Going once, going twice. The crack of wood on wood seemed to echo forever. Sold to Mr. Rowan Creed for $20,000. And just like that, Evelyn and her children belonged to a stranger. The paperwork took another hour. They did it inside the sheriff's office because the crowd had finally started to disperse and the wind was picking up, bringing the promise of snow. Evelyn sat in a hard wooden chair with Clara on her lap, and her other children pressed close, while men shuffled papers and exchanged money and decided her fate. Rowan signed documents without reading them. He counted out money with the casual ease of someone for whom $20,000 was nothing, and he didn't once look at Evelyn or the children, which somehow made it worse. "This concludes the legal proceedings," Sheriff Doyle said finally. "Mrs. Hart and her children are now the legal responsibility of Mr. Rowan Creed, in accordance with territorial debt laws." Legal responsibility. That was better than property, but not by much. "Can we go?" Rowan's question was directed at Doyle, not Evelyn. "You're free to leave." Doyle turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Hart, you're released from custody. Your obligations now lie with Mr. Creed." Released from custody, like she'd been arrested instead of robbed. Evelyn stood carefully, Clara still in her arms. "Where are we going?" Rowan looked at her for the first time since buying her family. His eyes were still that cold winter blue, still unreadable. "My ranch. It's about 40 miles north. 40 miles into the deep wilderness, away from anything resembling civilization. Away from anyone who might help if Rowan Creed turned out to be worse than Caleb Mercer." "We don't have anything," Evelyn said. "Our belongings. We're seized to cover your debts." Doyle didn't sound apologetic. "You leave with what you're wearing." Which was almost nothing. Evelyn's dress was 3 years old and had been patched twice. The children's clothes were worse, outgrown and threadbare. Only Thomas had proper boots. The others had shoes that wouldn't last a week in the snow. "We'll manage." Rowan headed for the door without checking to see if they followed. Evelyn hesitated. This was it then. The moment where she climbed onto a stranger's wagon and rode off into the wilderness with her children and hoped she hadn't just traded one nightmare for something worse. "Mama?" Thomas's hand found hers. "What do we do?" Evelyn looked at her son, her brave, angry, frightened boy who'd tried to punch a man 3 times his size to protect his family. She thought about Daniel, about the ranch they'd built, about everything that had been stolen from them. "We survive," she said, "like always." They followed Rowan Creed out into the February cold. His wagon was waiting outside, a large freight wagon pulled by 4 massive draft horses. The bed was already filled with supplies, sacks of flour and beans, crates of canned goods, coils of rope, bags of feed, tools, blankets. "Climb in the back," Rowan said, checking the horses' harnesses. "There's blankets to keep warm." The children scrambled up, burrowing into the pile of supplies like rabbits into a den. Evelyn started to follow, but Rowan's voice stopped her. "You can ride up front, if you want." It wasn't exactly an invitation, but it wasn't a command either. Evelyn studied him, trying to see past the cold exterior to whatever lay beneath. She failed. "All right." She climbed onto the bench seat, acutely aware of how close they'd be sitting. The wagon bench wasn't built for distance. Rowan swung up beside her a moment later, took the reins, and clicked his tongue at the horses. They rolled out of redemption without looking back. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The wagon creaked and swayed over the frozen road. Behind them, the children had gone quiet, exhausted probably, from fear and confusion and the emotional wreckage of the day. Evelyn kept her hands folded in her lap and tried not to think about what came next. "You didn't have to do that." She said it without looking at him, her eyes on the empty road ahead. "Pay that much. You could have waited, bid lower when Caleb split the lot." "Could have. So why didn't you?" Rowan was quiet for long enough that Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Saw my wife on an auction block once. Different circumstances, but same look in her eyes. Nobody bid for her except as part of a lot with 3 other women headed for a brothel in Cheyenne." He paused. "I was young and stupid, and had just sold my father's cattle herd. Paid everything I had for all 4 of them, got them to a church mission, then joined the army because I was broke." Evelyn turned to look at him. "Your wife? Dead now. 10 years. He said it flatly, like reporting the weather. "The point is, I know what it looks like when someone's deciding whether to fight or die, and I saw it in your face on that platform. I wasn't going to die. Maybe not today." They fell silent again. The road narrowed as they moved north, away from the settlements and into country that hadn't seen a plow or fence post. The mountains rose ahead, dark and jagged against the gray sky. "What do you want from us?" Evelyn asked finally. $20,000 isn't charity." "It's not." Rowan shifted the reins. "I've got a ranch. 1,200 acres in the valley between Copper Ridge and the northern peaks. It's hard country. Brutal winters, short growing season, predators that'll take down a full-grown steer. I've been running it alone for 3 years and I'm tired." "So you need workers." "I need help. There's a difference." He glanced at her, quick and assessing. "I'm not going to lie and say this will be easy. The work is hard, the conditions are rough, and if you can't pull your weight, people die. That's just how it is up there." "And if we refuse?" Evelyn's heart hammered, but she had to know. "If we decide we'd rather take our chances somewhere else?" Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her fully. Behind them, Thomas's head popped up from the blankets, alert to danger. "Then you're free to go," Rowan said. "Right now, if you want. I'll give you supplies and $50, and you can try your luck elsewhere. But you should know that Caleb Mercer owns or controls most of the territory between here and Helena. You won't find work, won't find housing, won't find help. He'll make sure of it." "Why?" "Because men like him don't like losing." Rowan picked up the reins again. "And you made him lose today in front of the whole town. He's not going to forget that." Evelyn thought about Caleb's face when Rowan had outbid him, the rage barely contained beneath his gentleman's veneer, the promise of retribution in his eyes. "So our choices are work for you or starve?" "Your choice is work with me and have a roof, food, and a chance to build something." Rowan clicked at the horses. "Or take your $50 and see how far it gets you. Either way, I'm not your enemy." "Then who are you?" "Someone who needs help and is willing to pay for it. Someone who won't hit your kids or force himself on you or work you to death. Beyond that," he shrugged, "I'm just a man trying to survive in hard country." It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it also wasn't a lie. Evelyn had gotten good at spotting lies in the last 3 months. She'd heard plenty of them, from Caleb, from the sheriff, from neighbors who'd sworn they'd help and then vanished when times got difficult. Rowan Creed wasn't lying. He was offering work and safety in exchange for labor. It was mercenary but honest. "We'll stay," Evelyn said. "For now." "Fair enough." They rode in silence as the road climbed higher into the mountains. Snow began to fall, Light at first, just dustings on the wind, but Evelyn knew the signs. They'd be in a full storm within hours. How much farther? She asked. 6 more hours in good weather, maybe 8 in this. Rowan nodded toward a stand of trees ahead. There's a line cabin about 2 miles up. We'll shelter there tonight, push on in the morning. A cabin? 1 room, fireplace, not much else. But it's weatherproof and there's bunks. He glanced back at the children. They'll be warmer than in the wagon. The cabin appeared as the snow thickened, a small structure built low to the ground designed to hide from the wind rather than withstand it. Rowan pulled the wagon close to the door and started unloading supplies while Evelyn herded the children inside. It was as described, 1 room, rough-hewn furniture, a stone fireplace that took up half of 1 wall. But it was dry and out of the wind, and right now that felt like luxury. Thomas, help me with wood. Rowan's command was quiet but firm. James, you take the water buckets to the stream. Follow the path behind the cabin. Margaret, see if there's any kindling left in the box by the fireplace. The children moved to obey, too tired to resist or question. Evelyn started to protest. They were her children, not his, but stopped herself. He was assigning tasks, getting them busy. It was smart, actually. Better than letting them sit and think about everything that had happened. By the time full dark fell, they had a fire going and water heating in a pot. Rowan produced salt pork and hard bread from his supplies, and they ate in silence while the storm howled outside. There's 4 bunks, Rowan said when the meal was finished. You and the little ones take them. Thomas and I will sleep by the fire. I can sleep by the fire, Thomas said quickly. I don't mind. Wasn't asking. Rowan's tone left no room for argument. Your mother and sisters take the bunks. That's how it works. Thomas looked like he might argue, but Evelyn shook her head slightly. Pick your battles, her expression said. This isn't one worth fighting. Later, with the children bedded down and the fire banked, Evelyn lay awake in the narrow bunk and listened to the storm. Through the flame's dying light, she could see Rowan sitting with his back against the wall, rifle across his knees, eyes open. You don't have to stay awake, she said quietly. Someone should. He didn't look at her. We're a long way from anywhere friendly. You think someone would follow us? I think Caleb Mercer doesn't like losing, and $20,000 is enough to make some men desperate. Rowan shifted slightly. Go to sleep, Mrs. Hart. You're safe tonight. She wanted to ask how he could promise that. Wanted to ask what would happen tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead into uncertainty. Wanted to ask what kind of man paid a fortune for strangers, and then stood watch so they could sleep safely. But exhaustion pulled her under before she could form the questions. And the last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Rowan Creed keeping vigil in the firelight, a solitary figure standing guard against the darkness outside. Mashig. They reached the ranch the following afternoon. The storm had blown itself out overnight, leaving the world buried under 8 inches of fresh snow. The children rode in the back of the wagon, huddled together for warmth, while Evelyn sat up front and watched the landscape grow progressively more isolated. That's Copper Ridge. Rowan pointed to a dark line of cliffs rising to the east. Your husband died there. Evelyn's breath caught. You knew Daniel? No, but I knew of him. Good man, from what I heard, honest, hard worker. He paused. Caleb tried to buy his land 5 times. Your husband turned him down every time. So Caleb killed him. Can't prove it, but yeah, that's my guess. Rowan guided the horses around a fallen tree. The thing about men like Caleb is they don't have to pull the trigger themselves. They just have to create the conditions and wait. You sound like you know from experience. I know enough to recognize the breed. His voice had gone cold. And I know that buying you today just made me Caleb's enemy. Want to make sure you understand that. This isn't going to end with you and your kids safe on my ranch. Caleb will come after what he wants, and he'll use every legal and illegal trick he can think of. Then why did you do it? Evelyn turned to face him. If you knew it would make you a target, because someone had to. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And I had the money. They crested a ridge, and the valley opened up before them. Evelyn's first thought was that it was beautiful, a wide expanse of snow-covered meadow with a frozen creek running through it, surrounded by mountains that blocked the worst of the wind. Her second thought was that it was desperately remote. The nearest neighbor would be miles away. And in winter, those miles might as well be continents. The ranch building sat at the valley's heart. The main house was larger than Evelyn had expected. 2 stories built from massive logs with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beside it stood a barn big enough for 20 horses. And beyond that, a bunkhouse, equipment shed, and several smaller structures she couldn't identify. "You built all this?" Evelyn couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "Most of it. The house was here when I bought the land. Previous owners started it and gave up after 2 winters. I finished it, added the barn and outbuildings." Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "It's not fancy, but it's solid." The children tumbled out of the wagon, suddenly animated. Even Thomas looked impressed, though he was trying hard not to show it. "Is there really room for all of us?" Margaret asked, staring up at the house. 5 bedrooms upstairs. Rowan started unloading supplies. "You'll each get your own, unless the younger ones want to share." Clara tugged on Evelyn's skirt. "Mama, can I have my own room? A real one?" "We'll see, baby." Evelyn's throat felt tight. At their old ranch, the children had shared 2 small rooms between them. Privacy had been a luxury they couldn't afford. "Take what you can carry and get inside," Rowan said. "Thomas, help me with the heavy sacks. Everyone else, just get warm. We'll worry about the rest later." The inside of the house was as surprising as the outside. The main room was enormous, with a fireplace big enough to stand in and windows that looked out over the valley. A kitchen took up one corner, with a cast-iron stove that must have cost a fortune to transport up here. Stairs led to the second floor, and through open doors, Evelyn could see a study and what looked like a storage room. "It's so big," James said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "It's lonely," Margaret said quietly, and Evelyn realized her daughter was right. Despite its size and quality, the house felt empty, like it was waiting for people to make it real. "Upstairs," Rowan said, carrying in the last of the immediate supplies. "Pick your rooms. There's beds in all of them, blankets in the chest at the end of the hall. Get settled, then come back down. We need to talk about how this is going to work." The children scattered up the stairs, their footsteps thundering overhead. Evelyn started to follow, but Rowan's voice stopped her. "Mrs. Hart, a moment." She turned back. He was standing by the fireplace, building up the fire from the banked coals he must have left before he went to town. "The master bedroom is at the end of the hall," he said without looking up. "It's yours." "What? No, I can't. You can and you will." He stood, dusting ash from his hands. "I built that room for—" He stopped, started again. "It's meant for a family, for a mother and her children. I sleep in the bunkhouse." "That's ridiculous. This is your house." "This is a house that's been empty too long." His voice was rough. "Maybe having people in it will help. Maybe it won't. Either way, you're taking the room. Non-negotiable." Evelyn wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. There was pain there, buried deep but visible if you knew how to look. Pain and loss and loneliness that had settled into his bones. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you." He nodded once and turned back to the fire. Dismissed, Evelyn climbed the stairs. The master bedroom took her breath away. It was huge, with windows on 2 walls and a fireplace of its own. The bed was massive, piled with quilts. There was a wardrobe, a dresser, even a small sitting area with 2 chairs. "Mama, look!" Clara came running from across the hall. "I have a window, and Margaret says we can share a room if I want, but I can have my own." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Evelyn gathered her daughter close, breathing in the little girl smell of her hair. "You can decide what you want." One by one the children appeared, pulled by the magnet of their mother. They piled onto the big bed together, 5 children and Evelyn in the middle. And for a moment it felt almost normal, almost like they were a family again instead of strangers in a stranger's house. "Is this real?" Thomas asked. He was trying to sound skeptical but couldn't quite hide the hope in his voice. "Are we actually staying here?" "For now," Evelyn said. "We'll work hard, prove we're worth keeping, and see what happens." "What if he's lying?" James, ever the worrier. "What if he's nice now, but changes later?" "Then we deal with it when it happens." Evelyn looked at each of her children in turn. "But so far, Mr. Creed has kept his word. He bought us all together. He gave us shelter. He's giving us rooms and privacy. That's more than most would do. Pa would have killed him for buying us, Thomas said fiercely. Yes. Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. But Pa isn't here, and we have to make the best of what we've got. That means working hard, following Mr. Creed's rules, and not causing trouble. Understood? Reluctant nods all around. Good. Now get settled, then come back downstairs. I suspect Mr. Creed has plans for us. He did. When they gathered in the main room 20 minutes later, Rowan was sitting at the big wooden table with paper and pencil, making notes. Sit does, he said without preamble. They sat. Here's how this works, Rowan began, looking at each of them in turn. This ranch runs cattle, about 200 head right now, though I'm hoping to increase that to 500 by next year. Cattle need feeding, watering, doctoring, and watching. The work is constant, especially in winter. He turned to Thomas. You're 13, so you're old enough for real ranch work. You'll work with me directly, feeding cattle, checking fence lines, managing the horses. It's hard. It's cold. And some days you'll hate it, but you'll learn skills that'll serve you the rest of your life. Thomas nodded slowly, trying to hide how proud he felt at being trusted with real work. James, you're 9, so you'll do lighter work. Chicken coop, gathering eggs, helping in the barn. You'll also help your mother in the house as needed. Yes, sir, James said quietly. Margaret, Clara, same for you. Age-appropriate work, nothing dangerous, but everyone works. No freeloaders on this ranch. What about me? Evelyn asked. What's my role? Rowan looked at her, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been uncertainty or might have been loneliness. House management, cooking, cleaning, mending, the vegetable garden in summer, the chickens year-round, plus, he hesitated, plus managing the household accounts if you can read and write. I can. Good. Because I hate paperwork, and I'm bad at it. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Between the two of us, maybe we can keep this operation running without going broke. And in return, Evelyn asked, what do we get besides room and board? Fair question. Rowan set down his pencil. Room, board, clothing as needed, and 20% of the ranch's profits split among you. That's in addition to what I already paid for you. If we have a good year, you'll make money. If we have a bad year, you'll at least be fed and sheltered. It was more than generous, more than fair. Evelyn felt her suspicion rising again, because men didn't offer deals like this without wanting something in return. Why? She asked. Why offer us so much? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was talking to someone who wasn't in the room. I told you I had a wife. Her name was Sarah. We had a son, William. He was 6 months old when the fever came through. Took them both in 3 days. He picked up his pencil again, studying it like he'd never seen one before. That was 10 years ago. For a long time I thought about leaving this place, going somewhere I wouldn't see Sarah in every corner of the house. But I built this ranch for a family, built it to mean something. He looked up at Evelyn. So when I saw you and your kids on that platform, I saw a family that deserved better, saw a chance to maybe make this place what it was supposed to be. That answer your question? Evelyn found she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just nodded. Good. Now, it's been a long day, and we've got an early start tomorrow. Get some rest. Thomas, you're with me at first light. We've got cattle to check. Everyone else, your mother will assign you tasks. He stood, clearly ending the meeting. The children scattered immediately, exhausted and overwhelmed. Evelyn started to follow, but Rowan's voice stopped her. Mrs. Hart, one more thing. She turned back. The doors all have locks, he said quietly. Your bedroom, the children's rooms. Use them if it makes you feel safer. I won't be offended. And with that, he grabbed his coat and headed out into the cold, leaving Evelyn standing in the big empty house that suddenly felt a little less empty, wondering what kind of man bought a family of strangers and then gave them locks to keep him out. Back. That night, Evelyn lay in the enormous bed in the master bedroom and listened to the house settle around her. The children were asleep. She'd checked on each of them twice, unable to quite believe they were safe. Clara and Margaret had decided to share a room after all, and Evelyn had found them curled together like puppies, Margaret's arm protective around her younger sister. The boys were in their own rooms, doors open a crack in case they needed her. Through the window, she could see the bunkhouse. A single lamp glowed in one window, Rowan keeping his own vigil. Evelyn thought about Daniel, about the ranch they'd built and the dreams they'd had. Thought about Caleb Mercer and his forged papers and his cold smile. Thought about standing on that auction platform with her children pressed against her skirts, believing her life was over. And she thought about Rowan Creed, the strange, silent man who'd paid a fortune for strangers and asked nothing in return except honest work. She didn't trust it, couldn't afford to. But for tonight, in this warm room with her children safe down the hall, Evelyn allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found a place where they could start rebuilding what had been taken from them. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of more snow. But inside the house on Rowan Creed's ranch, Evelyn Hart and her 5 children slept safely for the first time in months. And in the bunkhouse across the yard, a lonely man sat by lamplight and allowed himself to believe that maybe this time the house wouldn't stay empty. Maybe this time he'd found a way to turn his grief into something that mattered. The storm came before dawn, as mountain storms do, sudden and brutal. But the house held firm, built to withstand exactly this kind of punishment. And when morning broke gray and cold over the valley, 6 people woke in rooms that were starting to feel like they might someday become home. The first week nearly killed them, not literally, though there were moments when Evelyn wondered if literal death might be easier than the bone-grinding exhaustion that came with learning to survive in Rowan Creed's world. The man worked like he was trying to outrun something, and he expected everyone else to keep pace. Thomas lasted 3 days before his bravado cracked. It happened on the 4th morning, when Rowan woke him an hour before dawn to check the cattle in the north pasture. Evelyn heard them from her bedroom, Rowan's quiet knock, Thomas's groggy response, then silence as her son dragged himself out of bed for the 3rd consecutive day of backbreaking work. She found Thomas an hour later, sitting on the porch steps with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. "Baby." Evelyn sat beside him, careful not to touch. 13-year-old boys didn't like being babied, even when they were falling apart. "What happened?" "I can't do it." His voice was raw. "He wants me to ride out alone to check the fence line by Copper Ridge." "Alone, Mama. I don't even know where half these places are, and he just expects me to figure it out." "Did he give you directions?" "He drew a map on a piece of bark." Thomas looked up and his face was a mess of frustration and shame. What kind of man expects a kid to navigate by a drawing on tree bark? The kind who learned to survive the same way, Evelyn thought, but didn't say. "Where's Mr. Creed now?" "In the barn, shoeing horses like it's the easiest thing in the world." Thomas wiped his face roughly. "I'm trying, Mama. I swear I am. But he doesn't talk. He doesn't explain. He just shows me once and expects me to remember everything." Evelyn stood. "Stay here." She found Rowan exactly where Thomas had said, bent over a horse's hoof with a rasp in his hand. He didn't look up when she entered. "My son is 13 years old," Evelyn said without preamble. "He's never worked cattle, never navigated wilderness alone, and you're treating him like a seasoned ranch hand." Rowan finished with the hoof, set it down gently, and straightened. "I know how old he is." "Then why are you pushing him so hard?" "Because Winter doesn't care how old he is. Because if something happens to me, you'll need someone who knows how to keep this place running." He moved to the next hoof. "And because your son is tougher than you think, but he'll never know it if you keep coddling him." "I'm not coddling." "You are." Rowan looked at her then, and his eyes were hard. "You're teaching him it's okay to quit when things get difficult. Is that what you want? A son who gives up?" "I want a son who's still alive at 14. Evelyn's voice shook with anger. "You're going to get him killed with your silence, and your expectations, and your complete inability to remember he's a child." He stopped being a child the day his father died. Rowan's words were brutal and true. The world doesn't care that he's 13. Predators don't care. Winter doesn't care. So either he learns to survive or he doesn't, but babying him won't change the facts. Evelyn wanted to hit him, actually raised her hand before she caught herself, shocked at her own rage. Rowan saw it, didn't flinch, didn't move, just waited. "He's my son," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "My baby, and I've already lost his father. I won't." "Then teach him what he needs to know." Rowan set down the rasp. "Ride out with him today. Show him the fence line, the landmarks, how to read the terrain.
Tomorrow he goes alone, but today you go together. That work for you?
It wasn't what Evelyn had expected. She'd braced for another fight, more cold dismissal. Instead, Rowan was offering compromise. Yes, she said quietly. That works. Good. There's a mare in the third stall, gentle, won't spook, tacks on the wall. He went back to the horse's hoof. And Mrs. Hart, your son's going to be fine. He's got his father's spine and your stubbornness. That's a dangerous combination. It might have been a compliment. With Rowan, it was hard to tell. Evelyn rode out with Thomas that morning, and by afternoon they'd checked every mile of fence line in the north pasture. Thomas was exhausted but proud, and when Rowan asked him about weak spots at dinner, her son rattled off locations and problems with the confidence of someone twice his age. Rowan nodded once. Good work. 2 words. That was all. But Thomas glowed like he'd been given a medal. The pattern repeated itself over the following weeks. Rowan pushed, Evelyn mediated, the children adapted. Margaret took over the chickens with fierce efficiency, treating the birds like soldiers in her personal army. James discovered he had a gift with the horses, a quiet patience that made even the most skittish animals calm in his presence. Clara followed her mother everywhere, learning to cook and clean and manage a household 3 times the size of their old home. And slowly, painfully, they began to understand the rhythm of Rowan's ranch. He wasn't cruel. That became clear quickly. But he was relentless in his expectations and utterly silent about praise. He showed them how to do things once, maybe twice if they struggled, then expected them to figure it out. When they succeeded, he moved on to the next task. When they failed, he fixed it without comment and expected them to learn from watching. It was maddening. It was exhausting. And it worked. By the end of the first month, Thomas could ride fence lines alone and spot problems before they became catastrophes. Margaret's chicken operation was so efficient they had eggs to spare. James had somehow convinced 3 wild Mustangs to accept halters. Clara could cook a passable stew and had memorized the location of every tool in the equipment shed. And Evelyn had taken over the household accounts, discovering in the process that Rowan Creed was a far better rancher than businessman.
You're losing money on feed, she told him one evening, spreading ledgers across the kitchen table. You're paying top price from the supplier in Helena when you could buy direct from farmers for half the cost. Rowan looked up from the harness he was mending. The Helena supplier delivers and charges you double for the privilege.
Evelyn ran her finger down a column of numbers. If Thomas and I took the wagon to the Morrison farm next month, we could buy 3 months' worth of feed for what you're paying for 6 weeks from Helena. Morrison's place is 40 miles. 40 miles that would save you $300. She looked at him. That's not nothing. No. Rowan set down the harness. It's not. All right, plan the trip. But you take the rifle and you don't go alone. It was the first decision he'd let her make without argument, and it felt like victory. The pattern shifted after that. Rowan still made final decisions about ranch operations, but he started asking Evelyn's opinion first. Started listening when she pointed out inefficiencies or suggested improvements. Started treating her less like an employee and more like a partner. The children noticed. Thomas stopped looking at Rowan with quite so much suspicion. Margaret actually smiled once when Rowan complimented her organization of the grain storage. Even James, who rarely spoke to anyone outside the family, started asking Rowan questions about the horses. And Clara, sweet trusting Clara, decided Rowan was safe and attached herself to him like a burr. Mr. Creed, why do the horses sleep standing up? Mr. Creed, what's that bird called? Mr. Creed, can I help you fix the fence? To his credit, Rowan never snapped at her. He answered her questions with the same patient brevity he used for everything else, and when she insisted on following him around the ranch, he simply adjusted his pace so she could keep up. Watching them together did something strange to Evelyn's chest, made it tight in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with a feeling she couldn't quite name. 2 months into their arrangement, a late spring storm trapped them all inside for 3 days. The wind screamed down from the mountains, bringing snow so thick you couldn't see the barn from the house. The temperature dropped until water froze in its bucket within minutes of being drawn from the well. Rowan had moved into the house the night before the storm hit, not upstairs but onto the sofa in the main room, close to the fire. Body heat matters in weather like this, he'd said gruffly, and this house holds warmth better than the bunkhouse.
The first day passed in relative peace. They took turns reading aloud from the handful of books Rowan owned, dime novels mostly, adventure stories that kept the children entertained. Evelyn cooked, the children played quiet games, and Rowan sat by the window watching the storm like he was calculating something. The second day, cabin fever set in. The children got restless, then cranky. Margaret and James fought over a book. Clara cried because she was bored. Thomas paced like a caged animal, all his barely contained energy with nowhere to go. Enough! Rowan's voice cut through the chaos. He stood, grabbed his coat. Everyone up, we're going to the barn. In this? Evelyn stared at him. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. The animals need checking and the children need to move before they tear the house apart. He started pulling on boots. We rope ourselves together, move slow, and stay calm. It's 30 feet. We can manage 30 feet. They managed it, barely. The wind tried to rip them off their feet. The cold burned their lungs and visibility was measured in inches. But they made it, stumbling into the barn like shipwreck survivors reaching shore. That, Thomas gasped, was insane. That was necessary. Rowan shook snow from his coat. Now make yourselves useful. Animals need feeding, stalls need mucking, and I need help reinforcing that loose board on the north wall before the wind tears it off. For the next 3 hours, they worked. The barn was cold but not freezing, and the work kept blood moving. By the time they finished, everyone was exhausted but calmer, the particular peace that comes from physical labor completed. Why'd you really bring us out here? Thomas asked as they prepared to rope up for the journey back. Rowan checked the rope connections, making sure everyone was secure. Because sitting idle in a storm makes people crazy. Makes them think too much, worry too much. Action's better than worry. Even dangerous action? Sometimes especially dangerous action. Rowan met Thomas's eyes. Your father understood that. It's why he built something instead of just surviving. It was the first time Rowan had mentioned Daniel directly, and the comment hung in the air like smoke. You didn't know him, Thomas said, but there was less challenge in it than there might have been a month ago. No, but I knew men like him, men who saw hard country and decided to make something of it instead of running. Rowan pulled the door open and wind howled into the barn. Ready? They made it back to the house with no injuries beyond some minor frostbite on Thomas's ears. Evelyn doctored him while Rowan built up the fire, and that night they all slept in the main room, the children in bedrolls by the hearth, Evelyn in one of the armchairs, Rowan back on the sofa. Evelyn woke sometime in the deepest part of night to find Rowan standing by the window again, silhouetted against the storm. Can't sleep? She asked quietly, careful not to wake the children. Never could, in storms like this. He didn't turn around. Sarah hated them. The wind made her nervous. It was the first time he'd volunteered information about his wife. Evelyn sat up carefully. What was she like? Rowan was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, strong. Stronger than me in most ways. She grew up in Chicago, city girl through and through. But she married me anyway, followed me out here to the middle of nowhere, and never complained. Not once, even when things got hard. How did you meet? I was working railroad construction outside Chicago. She was a teacher. I got into a fight with some men who were harassing her students, ended up in jail overnight. She came to thank me the next morning. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Told me I was an idiot for using my fists, but that she appreciated the sentiment. Married her 3 months later. That's fast. When you know, you know. He turned from the window, and in the firelight his face looked younger, less weathered. We had 2 good years before the fever. 2 years, 6 months, and 11 days. Then it was just me again. I'm sorry. Me too. He moved back to the sofa, settled into it. Your husband? You loved him? Yes. Evelyn's throat was tight. Not at first. Ours was a practical marriage, 2 people who needed partnership more than romance. But love grew. By the end, I couldn't imagine life without him. And then you had to. Yes. They sat in silence, 2 people who'd loved and lost, while the storm raged outside and their children slept peacefully by the fire. Thank you, Evelyn said finally, for not separating us, for keeping us together. Don't thank me yet. Rowan's voice was grim. Caleb hasn't made his move. When he does, keeping you together might turn out to be the thing that destroys all of us. The storm broke on the 3rd day.
and life returned to its grinding routine. But something had shifted in those 3 days of forced proximity. The children stopped treating Rowan like a stranger and started treating him like a fixture. Still distant, still difficult, but part of their world now. And Rowan, who'd been so careful to maintain separation, started letting his guard slip in small ways. He taught Thomas to throw a knife, helped Margaret build a better nesting box for the chickens, listened patiently to James's rambling stories about the horses, let Clara sit on his lap while he worked on tack repair. And he talked to Evelyn. Not a lot. Rowan Creed would never be a man of many words, but enough that she started to understand the person beneath the silence. He'd been a soldier after Sarah died, spent 5 years in the cavalry, fighting in skirmishes she'd never heard of in places that didn't matter to anyone except the men who died there. He'd mustered out with a pension and a case of what he called bad nights, times when he'd wake up reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, heart-hammering, certain he was back in some nameless canyon watching friends die. It's less now, he told her one evening while they worked together in the kitchen. Her cooking, him repairing a chair that had started to wobble. Used to be every night, now it's maybe once a month. What helps? Work, routine, purpose. He tested the chair leg, having something to protect besides myself. He meant the ranch. Evelyn knew that. But the way he said it, the way his eyes flickered to where the children were playing in the next room, made her wonder if he meant something more. Spring came grudgingly to the valley, bringing mud and melting snow and the endless work of preparing for summer. They repaired winter damage to fences and buildings, moved cattle to new pasture, prepared the garden plot, and worked from dawn until after dark every single day. Thomas grew 3 inches and developed shoulders his father would have been proud of. Margaret's organizational skills extended to the entire household, and Evelyn frequently caught herself following her 7-year-old daughter's systems because they worked better than her own. James spent every free moment with the horses and started talking about breeding programs with an intensity that surprised everyone. Clara learned to ride badly but enthusiastically, and Evelyn learned that she was stronger than she'd thought. Learned that she could work a full day, manage a household, raise 5 children, and still have energy left for planning and thinking and building something better than mere survival. By early summer, the ranch was running like a machine. A slightly chaotic machine with too many moving parts and a tendency to break down at inconvenient moments, but a machine nonetheless. That's when Caleb Mercer made his first move. It started small. The supply store in Redemption suddenly refused to extend credit. When Evelyn went to the bank to open an account for the household funds, she was told there'd been a mistake in the paperwork. Could she come back next week? Next week, there was a different mistake. The week after, the bank manager was mysteriously unavailable. "It's Caleb," Rowan said when Evelyn told him. "He's calling in favors, making sure we're isolated." "What do we do?" "We adapt." He studied the map on his wall. "There's a trading post 60 miles west, outside Caleb's territory. We start buying supplies there. It's farther and more expensive, but they can't refuse service if they don't know who we are. That's a 2-day trip just for supplies. Then we make it a regular trip, once a month, like clockwork." He turned to her. "Can you handle it? You, Thomas, and the wagon?" "We can handle it." Evelyn said it with more confidence than she felt. The first trip went smoothly. The second did too. On the third trip, in late June, with summer heat making the road shimmer, they were ambushed. It happened on the return journey when they were loaded down with supplies and moving slowly. 3 men stepped out of the trees, rifles in hand, faces covered with bandanas. "Stop the wagon," the leader said. He was tall and thin, with eyes that were too close together. "Nice and easy." Thomas's hand moved toward the rifle under the seat, but Evelyn grabbed his wrist. "Don't!" "Smart woman." The leader approached the wagon. "We're going to need those supplies, and that money you're carrying." "We don't have any money." It was true. They'd spent everything at the trading post. "Then we'll take the supplies, all of them." Evelyn's mind raced. Without these supplies, they wouldn't make it to the next trip. They'd have to go back to dealing with Redemption, which meant dealing with Caleb's restrictions. "Take half," she said. "Leave us enough to get home, and we won't report this." The leader laughed. "You think we care if you report it? Who's going to come after us, the sheriff? He works for Mercer, same as we do." Thomas went rigid. "You're Caleb's men." "Smart boy." The leader gestured to his companions. "Take it all." And if they give you trouble, shoot the kid first. That's when Thomas moved. Fast, faster than Evelyn could stop him, he had the rifle out from under the seat and aimed at the leader's chest.
"I'm Daniel Hart's son," Thomas said, and his voice was steady even though his hands shook. "My father built his ranch with his bare hands, and Caleb Mercer stole it with lies. Now you're going to rob us for him?" The rifle didn't waver. "Go ahead, try, but I promise you'll be dead before you get a shot off." The three men exchanged glances. The leader raised his hand slightly. "Kid, put the rifle down before someone gets hurt." "Someone's already going to get hurt." Thomas cocked the hammer. "Question is whether it's just you or all three of you." "Thomas." Evelyn kept her voice calm, though her heart was trying to hammer through her ribs. "Lower the rifle." "Not until they leave, Mama." The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. Finally, the leader backed up a step. "This ain't worth it. Mercer didn't pay us enough to die for flour and beans." "Smart choice," Thomas said. The three men melted back into the trees. Evelyn and Thomas sat frozen in the wagon for a full minute, listening to make sure they were really gone, before Thomas finally lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "I could have gotten us killed," he whispered. "You saved us." Evelyn pulled him close, rifle and all. "You were brilliant and brave and completely insane, but you saved us." They made it back to the ranch as the sun set. Rowan took one look at their faces and knew something had happened. Evelyn told him everything while Thomas unhitched the horses, and by the time she finished, Rowan's expression had gone cold and dangerous. "Caleb's escalating," he said quietly. "This isn't just business pressure anymore. He's using violence." "What do we do?" "We prove we're not an easy target." Rowan grabbed his coat. "From now on, no one travels alone, ever. And Thomas," he turned to where the boy had just entered. "You did good today. Your father would be proud." Thomas's eyes went bright, and he looked away quickly. "I just did what needed doing." "That's what being a man is." Rowan's hand settled briefly on Thomas's shoulder. "Knowing what needs doing and doing it even when you're scared. You're on your way." After Thomas went to bed, Evelyn found Rowan in the barn, checking weapons she hadn't known he owned. Rifles, pistols, even a shotgun that looked like it could take down a bear. "You're expecting a fight," she said. "I'm preparing for one. There's a difference." He loaded shells into the shotgun with practiced efficiency. "Caleb's testing us, seeing how far he can push before we break. Today he learned we don't break easy. But he'll try again." "Yes." Rowan looked at her, and his eyes were the cold blue of winter sky. "And next time he'll come himself or send men who won't back down from a 13-year-old with a rifle. You and the children need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For whatever comes." He handed her one of the pistols. "You know how to use this?" "Daniel taught me. I'm not a great shot, but I know the basics." "Good. Keep it with you. And teach the older children, Thomas especially. If something happens to me, you need to be able to defend yourselves." The casual way he said, "if something happens to me," made Evelyn's chest tight. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "You don't know that." He turned back to the weapons. "I'm the reason Caleb can't touch you easily. If I'm gone, you become vulnerable again, so you need to be ready to protect your family without me." "I don't want to think about it anyway." His voice was hard. "Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst. That's how you survive." Over the next weeks, Rowan drilled them all on shooting, on safety, on awareness. Thomas took to it naturally, but even gentle James learned to load and fire a rifle without flinching. Margaret refused at first, then changed her mind after Rowan explained that protection wasn't about wanting to hurt people. It was about making sure no one could hurt you. Evelyn practiced until her shoulder ached from recoil and her hands cramped from gripping the pistol. She'd never wanted to be good at violence, but she wanted to protect her children more than she wanted to stay ignorant. And through it all, Caleb stayed silent. No more ambushes, no more pressure, just an ominous quiet that felt more threatening than action. "He's planning something big," Rowan said one evening in late July. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Caleb's not a patient man. This silence means he's working on something he thinks will finish us." "Let him come." Evelyn surprised herself with the venom in her voice. "We'll be ready." Rowan looked at her, something like pride in his expression. "Yes, we will."
but neither of them mentioned what they both knew, that being ready and surviving were two very different things. The ranch thrived through summer despite the constant low-level tension. The cattle multiplied, the garden produced more than they could eat, and the children grew stronger and more capable with each passing week. On good days, Evelyn could almost forget they were living under threat. On bad days, every sound made her reach for her pistol. In August, Clara turned 5, and Evelyn used precious sugar to bake a cake. They celebrated with a meal on the porch, all 7 of them crowded around the table they'd dragged outside. Rowan gave Clara a hand-carved horse he'd made in secret, and the little girl cried with happiness. Watching her daughter's joy, watching her other children laugh and tease each other like normal siblings instead of traumatized survivors, Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. This was what Daniel had wanted, a life for their children built on hard work and hope. She'd thought that dream died with him. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe it had just changed shape. "Thank you," she told Rowan later when the children were in bed and they were cleaning up, "for all of this, for giving them a childhood again." "They earned it." Rowan scrubbed a plate. "They work hard, never complain. They're good kids." "They are." Evelyn paused. "You'd have been a good father to William." Rowan's hand stilled in the wash water. "Maybe. I'll never know." "I think you're proving it now." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was completely unguarded, vulnerable, lost. "They're not mine," he said quietly. "I'm just keeping them safe until what? Until they don't need you anymore?" Evelyn shook her head. "That's not how family works. I wouldn't know. I lost mine. And we lost ours, but maybe—" She stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. Rowan dried his hands slowly. "Maybe what? Maybe that's what family is. Not blood, not law. Just people who choose to stay together even when they don't have to." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of things neither knew how to say, gratitude and fear and something else, something that made Evelyn's heart beat faster whenever Rowan looked at her the way he was looking at her now. "Evelyn." Her name in his rough voice sounded different, special. "I need you to understand something. When Caleb comes, and he will come, things are going to get ugly, violent, and I can't promise I'll be able to protect all of you. Then we'll protect each other. It might not be enough. It has to be." Evelyn met his eyes. "Because we've already lost everything once. We're not losing it again." Rowan reached out, hesitated, then tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpected, that Evelyn forgot to breathe. "All right," he said finally. "Then we make our stand together." 2 weeks later, Caleb Mercer's lawyer arrived with papers claiming ownership of the northern 40 acres of Rowan's land. The war had officially begun. The lawyer's name was Thornton Webb, and he arrived in a carriage that cost more than most families earned in 5 years. His suit was Eastern-tailored, his mustache waxed to aggressive points, and his smile suggested he'd never lost a case in his miserable life. "Mr. Creed." He didn't offer his hand. "I represent Mr. Caleb Mercer in matters of property acquisition and territorial law. I'm here to inform you that you're currently occupying land that legally belongs to my client." Rowan stood on his porch with his arms crossed, looking about as impressed as a man watching paint dry. "That's an interesting claim. You have documents?" "I do." Thornton produced a leather portfolio with the flourish of a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. "Surveys conducted in 1888 show clear boundary markers. Your northern 40 acres fall within territory deeded to Mr. Mercer's holdings as of 1887. You've been trespassing for 3 years. Those surveys were done by Mercer's own men." Rowan didn't move to take the papers. "Funny how they found his property extending exactly onto the best grazing land in the valley. The Territorial Land Office has certified these documents." Thornton's smile never wavered. "If you'd like to dispute them, you're welcome to file a claim. Of course, legal proceedings take time, and during that time you'd be required to vacate the disputed property. That's roughly a quarter of your cattle range, isn't it?" Behind Rowan, through the open door, Evelyn stood with Thomas. She'd heard every word, and her hands were clenched so tight her nails cut crescents into her palms. "How much?" Rowan asked. "I beg your pardon?" "How much does Caleb want to make this go away, because we both know this isn't about 40 acres of grazing land?" Thornton's smile finally cracked. Mr. Mercer has no interest in negotiation. He's simply reclaiming what's rightfully his. You have 30 days to remove your cattle from the disputed territory. After that, any animals found there will be considered abandoned property and dealt with accordingly. Dealt with meaning shot, meaning handled according to territorial law. Thornton tucked his portfolio under his arm. Good day, Mr. Creed. I trust you'll make the sensible choice. He climbed back into his carriage and rolled away, leaving nothing but dust and the smell of expensive cologne. Rowan stood motionless for a full minute after the carriage disappeared. Then he turned and walked into the house, past Evelyn and Thomas, straight to his study. The door closed with a click that sounded final.
Mama? Thomas's voice was tight. What do we do? I don't know, baby. Evelyn stared at the closed study door. I honestly don't know. For 3 days, Rowan withdrew into himself. He worked the ranch with mechanical efficiency, speaking only when necessary, his face set in lines that looked carved from granite. He took his meals alone, slept in the bunkhouse despite the comfortable room he'd been using in the house, and avoided everyone with the single-minded determination of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. The children noticed. Clara asked repeatedly why Mr. Creed was mad, and no amount of explanation could convince her he wasn't angry at her. Margaret went quiet, her usual organizational energy dampened by worry. James spent extra time with the horses, finding comfort in creatures who didn't have complicated human problems. Thomas tried to act tough, but failed spectacularly, his anxiety showing in the way he jumped at every sound and checked the windows constantly for threats that hadn't materialized. On the 4th day, Evelyn had enough. She found Rowan in the north pasture, checking fence posts that didn't need checking. The disputed territory stretched out before them, 40 acres of good grass that would be lost in 26 days. You're scaring the children, she said without preamble. That's not my intention. I don't care about your intention. I care that Clara thinks she did something wrong, and Thomas is wound so tight he's going to snap. Evelyn moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. What's going on in your head? Rowan's jaw worked. I'm trying to figure out how to fight a legal battle I can't win. The surveys are fake. Proving that requires lawyers, money, and time we don't have. Caleb knows that. He turned away, staring at the mountains. This was always going to happen. I just thought I'd have more time to prepare. Prepare for what? Losing? Preparing to get you and the children somewhere safe before this turns into something we can't walk away from. His voice was raw. Caleb's not going to stop with 40 acres. This is the opening move. He wants the whole ranch, and he's going to take it piece by piece until I'm backed into a corner with no options left. Then we don't let him back us into a corner. And how exactly do you propose we do that? Rowan turned on her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw fear in his eyes. Real bone-deep fear. We can't outspend him, can't outfight him legally, and if we try violence, he'll use the law to destroy us. So please, enlighten me. What's your brilliant solution? Evelyn had been thinking about this for 3 days, turning possibilities over in her mind while she cooked and cleaned and tried to hold her family together. The idea was half-formed, dangerous, and possibly insane, but it was the only idea she had. We take the fight to him, she said, before he's ready for it. Meaning what? Meaning Caleb has proof of his claims, real or forged. Those documents are somewhere, probably in his house. If we could get them, see exactly what he's using against us, we might find evidence they're fake, or find the real property records that prove they're wrong. Rowan stared at her. You want to break into Caleb Mercer's house. I want to find the truth before he buries it so deep we'll never see daylight. Evelyn's heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. You said yourself legal channels won't work, so we go around them. That's insane. That's survival. She stepped closer. Daniel's will disappeared after he died. The original deed to our land vanished. Every piece of paper that might have helped us fight Caleb just conveniently ceased to exist. You think that's coincidence? No, but breaking into his house is risky, dangerous, possibly stupid. Evelyn cut him off. But what's the alternative? Sit here and watch him take everything piece by piece? Run and let him win? Or fight back the only way we can? Rowan looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. Respect, maybe. A recognition of a kindred stubborn spirit. If we do this, he said slowly, and we get caught,
It won't be jail time. Caleb will make sure we disappear. You understand that? Yes. And you're willing to risk it anyway? I'm willing to risk everything for my children's future. Evelyn's voice was iron. The question is, are you? Rowan's laugh was short and humorless. I paid $20,000 for you and walked into Caleb's crosshairs. I think we both know the answer. They spent the next week planning. Rowan knew the layout of Caleb's mansion from years ago, before the bad blood started, when he'd been invited to a Territorial Ranchers Association meeting. The house sat on a hill overlooking Redemption, 3 stories of imported lumber and Eastern pretension. Caleb lived there with his wife Constance, a handful of servants, and enough security to make it clear he had enemies. Guards rotate every 4 hours, Rowan said, sketching a rough map on butcher paper spread across the kitchen table. The children were asleep upstairs, which meant they could speak freely. 2 on the grounds, 1 at the front entrance, 1 at the back. They're not exactly professional soldiers, but they're armed, and they know what Caleb pays them for. What about inside? That's where it gets complicated. The servants sleep in the 3rd-floor quarters. Caleb and Constance have rooms on the 2nd floor, east wing. Caleb's study is 1st floor, west side, with a view of the valley. That's where he'd keep important documents. Probably, but the study has a safe, big one, built into the wall. I saw it once when I was waiting for a meeting. Rowan tapped the map. Even if we get into the house, getting into that safe is another problem entirely. Evelyn studied the sketch. What about the wife, Constance? Does she know what Caleb does? She'd have to be blind not to. Rowan's voice was grim. But knowing and caring are different things. Constance married Caleb for his money. Everyone knows it. She gets to play lady of the manor, and in exchange she doesn't ask questions about how he makes his fortune. So she's complicit, at minimum. He rolled up the paper. Why? Because people who don't ask questions usually don't want to know the answers. Evelyn's mind was working. Which means if confronted with those answers, they might react unpredictably. That's a lot of maybes to hang a plan on. Do you have a better one? Rowan didn't answer, which was answer enough. They chose the night of the Territorial Cattlemen's Association dinner, an annual event where every rancher and landowner within 100 miles gathered to discuss business, politics, and who was sleeping with whose wife. Caleb would be there, playing the respectable baron, while his house sat relatively empty. Thomas is in charge while we're gone, Rowan said the afternoon before they left. He was addressing all 5 children gathered in the main room. He has the rifle, and he knows how to use it. If anyone comes to the house, you bar the doors and don't open them for anyone except us. Understood? 5 solemn nods. We should be back before dawn, Evelyn added, trying to sound more confident than she felt. But if something goes wrong— Nothing's going wrong, Thomas interrupted. His jaw was set in that stubborn line that reminded Evelyn so much of Daniel it hurt. You 2 are going to sneak in, get what you need, and come home. We'll be fine. Thomas, Mama, I'm not a kid anymore. He met her eyes steadily. You and Mr. Creed are doing what needs doing. We'll hold down the fort, I promise. Margaret moved closer to her brother, followed by James and Clara. They stood together, a united front of children who'd grown up too fast and learned to be tougher than they should have to be. All right, Evelyn said, her throat tight. We'll be back soon. They left at sunset, taking the fastest horses and riding hard through the gathering darkness. The journey to Redemption took 3 hours, and they spent it in near silence, both focused on what lay ahead. The town was lit up when they arrived, every saloon and hotel blazing with light as the ranchers and their wives gathered for the annual spectacle. Caleb's mansion sat on its hill above the chaos, dark except for a few windows on the 3rd floor where the servants would be preparing for their employer's return. Rowan and Evelyn left their horses tied in a copse of trees a quarter-mile from the house and approached on foot. The night was moonless, which helped, but it also meant navigating by feel and memory. 2 guards, like I said. Rowan's whisper was barely audible. One's by the front gate, the other's doing a circuit of the grounds. We wait for the circuit guard to pass, then we move. They waited in the shadows, and Evelyn became acutely aware of every sound, her breathing, her heartbeat, the rustle of her skirt against the grass. She'd changed into her oldest, darkest dress, but it still felt impossibly loud in the silence.
The guard passed within 10 feet of their hiding spot, close enough that Evelyn could hear him whistling tunelessly. He was young, probably not much older than Thomas, and he looked bored rather than alert. "Now," Rowan breathed. They moved like ghosts, crossing the open ground to the house in seconds. Rowan had said the kitchen entrance would be their best bet. Servant's door, rarely locked, facing away from the guard posts. His information was correct. The door opened with barely a whisper of sound. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Evelyn's eyes adjusted slowly to the deeper darkness, making out shapes that became furniture, doorways, stairs. Rowan moved with confidence, leading her through what felt like a maze of corridors until they reached a heavy wooden door. "The study," he murmured. "Stay here. Watch the hallway." "We go together." Evelyn kept her voice equally quiet. That was the deal. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded and tried the door. Locked, of course. He produced a thin piece of metal from his pocket. Evelyn had watched him practice with the lock picks for days, and went to work. The lock clicked open after what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute. They slipped inside, and Rowan closed the door carefully behind them. The study was everything Evelyn expected from a man like Caleb. Ostentatious, expensive, designed to intimidate. The walls were lined with books he'd probably never read, the furniture was imported, and the massive desk dominated the room like a throne. "The safe," Rowan said, moving to the wall behind the desk. Here, it was hidden behind a painting of what looked like a fox hunt, aristocratic figures on horseback, chasing something too small to see. Rowan moved the painting aside, revealing the safe's face. It was bigger than Evelyn had imagined, with a combination dial and a handle that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. "Can you open it?" she asked. "I can try." He pressed his ear against the safe's door and started turning the dial slowly. "This'll take time. Time they didn't have." Evelyn moved to the desk, careful not to disturb anything, and started searching. The drawers were locked, but she had pins in her hair that worked well enough. The first drawer held nothing but correspondence. Business letters, invoices, things that might be useful but weren't what they needed. The second drawer was more promising. Land deeds, survey maps, legal documents with impressive seals. She pulled them out carefully, spreading them across the desk to read by the faint moonlight coming through the windows. "Rowan," she whispered. "Look at this." He left the safe reluctantly and came to peer over her shoulder. The document she'd found was a deed to property in the Northern Valley, the disputed 40 acres. The signature at the bottom said it was recorded in 1887, just like Thornton had claimed. But the paper was wrong. Evelyn had handled enough legal documents in her life to recognize the difference between something genuinely aged and something artificially distressed. This paper was too clean, the ink too crisp. It might fool someone who wasn't looking carefully, but under scrutiny, it was obviously recent. "It's a forgery," she said. But proving it, a door slammed somewhere in the house. Voices raised in greeting, the sound of footsteps on hardwood floors. "They're back early," Rowan hissed. He started gathering the documents. "We need to go, now." But it was already too late. The study door opened and light flooded the room. Constance Mercer stood in the doorway, holding an oil lamp and looking more surprised than frightened. "Who?" she started, then recognized Rowan. "You. What are you doing in my husband's study?" Evelyn's mind raced. Run? Fight? Try to explain? None of those options ended well. But Constance wasn't screaming for guards. She was just standing there, lamp in hand, staring at them with an expression that was harder to read than fear or anger. It was something closer to resignation. "You're looking for proof he forged those documents," Constance said. It wasn't a question. "About the Northern Valley property." Evelyn and Rowan exchanged glances. This wasn't how confrontations were supposed to go. "Yes," Evelyn said finally. There was no point lying. "We know they're fake. We just need to prove it." Constance stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. In the lamplight, Evelyn could see her more clearly. A handsome woman in her 40s, wearing an evening gown that probably cost more than a year of ranch profits. But there was something in her eyes that spoke of weariness and disappointment and choices she'd made that couldn't be unmade. "They're in the safe," Constance said quietly. "The originals. along with the forged versions and the actual survey maps that show the boundaries, were always where Mr. Creed thought they were. "Why are you telling us this?" Rowan's voice was taut with suspicion.
"Because I'm tired." Constance set the lamp on the desk. "Tired of pretending I don't know what my husband is. Tired of watching him destroy people to feed his own greed. Tired of being complicit." She looked directly at Evelyn. "Your husband was a good man. Caleb had him killed, you know. Made it look like an accident, but it was murder." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed, having it said out loud by someone who would know, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Why?" The word came out choked. "Why Daniel?" "Because he wouldn't sell. Because he stood up to Caleb in a territorial council meeting and made him look like the bully he is." Constance's smile was bitter. "Because men like my husband can't tolerate anyone who refuses to bow." "If you know all this, why haven't you said anything?" Thomas would have demanded, and Evelyn heard the echo of her son's righteous anger in her own voice. "Because I'm a coward." Constance said it simply, without self-pity. "Because I like my comfortable life, and I've convinced myself that staying silent isn't the same as participating. But tonight, seeing you here, risking everything to fight back..." She stopped. "I suppose I'm tired of being a coward too." She crossed to the safe and spun the dial with practiced ease. The heavy door swung open, revealing stacks of documents, cash, and a small collection of jewelry that was probably worth more than Rowan's entire ranch. "The documents you want are in the red folder," Constance said, stepping back. "Take them. Take copies of everything that might help you. But you need to leave before Caleb realizes I came up here." "Why did you come up?" Rowan asked, already reaching for the red folder. "Because I saw you ride past from the dinner party, recognized your horse." Constance's smile was sad. "I told Caleb I had a headache and needed to come home. He'll follow in an hour or so. You have that long." Evelyn started to thank her, but Constance held up a hand. "Don't. This doesn't make us friends. It doesn't absolve me of years of looking the other way." She picked up her lamp. "But maybe it's a start at being someone I don't hate when I look in the mirror." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Evelyn and Rowan stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. "Could be a trap," Rowan said quietly. "Could be." Evelyn moved to the safe. "But we're here, and those documents are right there. We take them, or we leave with nothing." They took them. The red folder contained everything Constance had promised. The original deeds showing Rowan's property boundaries were legitimate. Copies of the forged documents with notes in Caleb's handwriting about who to bribe at the land office. Survey maps that had been deliberately altered, and most damning of all, a ledger detailing payments to the surveyor who'd conducted the false boundary assessment. There was more too. Documents relating to Daniel's property, including his real will, the one that left everything to Evelyn and the children, not the forged version Caleb had used to steal their land. Letters between Caleb and the sheriff discussing how to handle the Daniel Hart problem. And most chilling, a list of other ranchers Caleb had targeted, with notes about their accidents and unfortunate circumstances. "This is enough to hang him," Rowan said, spreading the documents out. "Not literally, but legally. This proves fraud, conspiracy, possibly accessory to murder." "Then we take all of it." Evelyn started folding documents carefully. "Every piece of paper that shows what he's done." They worked quickly, stuffing papers into Rowan's saddlebag that they'd brought for this exact purpose. When they finished, the safe still looked full. Caleb had enough other incriminating evidence that removing one folder wouldn't be immediately obvious. "We should go," Rowan said, but Evelyn was staring at something else in the safe. A small leather journal, worn and stained, that looked out of place among the neat stacks of papers. She pulled it out and opened it. Daniel's handwriting stared back at her from the first page. "It's his diary," she whispered. "Daniel's, from the months before he died." "Evelyn, we don't have time. He wrote about Caleb, about the threats, the pressure to sell." She turned pages, scanning quickly. About meetings with other ranchers who were facing the same thing. About going to the territorial marshal but being turned away because Caleb had already paid him off. Her voice broke. He knew he was in danger. He knew, and he stayed anyway because he wouldn't let Caleb win. Rowan's hand settled on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "We need to leave. Now. before that hour runs out. Evelyn clutched the diary to her chest, then carefully placed it in the saddlebag with the other documents. They closed the safe, replaced the painting, and were halfway to the study door when they heard it, shouting, the sound of a carriage arriving, heavy boots on the front stairs. He came back early, Rowan said flatly. Probably suspected something when Constance left. They ran, through the corridors, retracing their path, but the voices were getting closer. The front entrance was blocked. The kitchen exit would take them past the main staircase where Caleb's voice was bellowing for his wife, demanding to know why she'd really come home. "The servant stairs," Rowan hissed. "Third floor, down the back. It's our only chance." They took the stairs two at a time, climbing instead of descending, which felt completely wrong but was the only route that wouldn't take them past Caleb and whoever he'd brought with him. The third floor was dark and quiet, the servants probably hiding in their rooms from whatever domestic storm was brewing below. The back stairs were narrow and steep, designed for people who didn't matter to move through the house invisibly. Evelyn nearly fell twice, caught only by Rowan's hand on her arm. Behind them, Caleb's voice roared through the house, calling for guards, for his wife, for someone to explain what the hell was going on. They burst out the back door into the kitchen garden just as guards converged on the front of the house. The circuit guard was running toward the commotion, which meant the back approach was momentarily clear. "Go," Rowan said, and they ran. Through the garden, over the fence, across open ground that felt endless and exposed. Every second Evelyn expected to hear shouts behind them, gunfire, pursuit. But they made it to the trees, to their horses, and were mounted and riding before the alarm truly went up. They heard it as they galloped away, Caleb's voice carrying across the night, screaming about theft and trespassers and how he'd hunt them down. Then the sound of gunfire, but they were already out of range, pushing their horses as fast as they dared in the darkness. They didn't stop until they were 5 miles from Redemption, when Rowan finally pulled his horse to a walk and Evelyn nearly collapsed in her saddle from the rush of terror draining away. "We did it," she said, her voice shaking. "We actually did it. We got lucky." Rowan was scanning the darkness behind them. If Constance hadn't helped us, if Caleb had been 10 minutes earlier, if a dozen things had gone differently, but they didn't. Evelyn straightened in her saddle. "We have the proof. The real documents, the forged ones, Daniel's diary. Everything we need to destroy Caleb's case and prove he's been committing fraud for years. We have it if we can get it to someone who'll listen." Rowan urged his horse back to a faster pace. "Caleb controls the sheriff, half the judges, and most of the territorial officials. Getting these documents in front of someone who'll actually act on them is the next problem. Then we'll solve that problem too." Evelyn clutched the saddlebag tighter. One way or another. They rode through the rest of the night, racing the dawn in Caleb's inevitable pursuit. The mountains slowly took shape around them as the sky lightened from black to gray. By the time they crested the ridge above Rowan's Valley, the sun was breaking over the eastern peaks. The ranch looked peaceful in the early light. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant the children were awake and had kept the fire going. The cattle were moving toward the water, their usual morning routine undisturbed. "Home," Evelyn said softly. "For now." Rowan's voice was grim. "But this isn't over. Caleb knows we have his documents. He's going to come for them, and he's going to come hard. Let him." Evelyn's exhaustion was gone, replaced by something harder and colder. "We have the truth now, and the truth is going to burn his empire to the ground." They rode down into the valley as the sun climbed higher, carrying stolen documents and Daniel's diary and the beginning of the end for Caleb Mercer. Behind them, somewhere in Redemption, a wealthy man raged and planned revenge. But ahead, 5 children waited who'd trusted their mother and the strange man who'd bought them to come home safely. And they had. Battered, terrified, but victorious in the only way that mattered. The war wasn't over, but they'd just won a battle Caleb never saw coming. And that, Evelyn thought as she dismounted in front of the house and pulled the saddlebag full of evidence over her shoulder, was only the beginning. Thomas appeared in the doorway, rifle still in his hands, his face splitting into a relieved grin when he saw them. The other children tumbled out after him, all talking at once, wanting to know what happened, if they were safe, if everything was all right. "We'll explain everything," Evelyn promised, gathering them close. "But first, breakfast.
Then we figure out how to make sure Caleb Mercer pays for everything he's done. Rowan stood apart from the family reunion, watching with that careful distance he maintained. But when Evelyn looked up and met his eyes, she saw something there that hadn't been before. Not just respect or partnership, but something deeper. Something that recognized they'd crossed a line together that couldn't be uncrossed.
They'd broken the law together, risked their lives together, stolen evidence that might get them killed or might save them, and there was no going back from that kind of shared danger. "Thank you," she mouthed. He nodded once, then turned to start unloading his horse. But Evelyn saw the corner of his mouth twitch in what might have been the start of a smile, and she knew that whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced last night. Together. The documents lay heavy in the saddlebag, full of secrets and proof, and the power to destroy a man who'd thought himself untouchable. Evelyn carried them inside, her children following, while Rowan dealt with the horses and pretended he wasn't part of this family, even though everyone could see he was. Outside, the valley basked in morning sun, peaceful and perfect. But storms were coming, legal, violent, inevitable. And when they arrived, Evelyn Hart and Rowan Creed would be ready. They'd already proven they'd risk everything for what was right. Now they just had to survive long enough to use what they'd stolen to bring a tyrant to his knees. The territorial courthouse in Helena was 3 days' ride from the ranch, and they made the journey in 2. Rowan pushed them hard, changing horses at a friend's ranch halfway and sleeping only when exhaustion made riding dangerous. The documents rode in a locked box strapped to the wagon, and Evelyn kept one hand on it constantly, as if her touch alone could protect what they'd risked everything to steal. Thomas came with them. Evelyn had wanted to leave all the children at the ranch with Margaret in charge, but Thomas had refused with a stubbornness that reminded her painfully of Daniel. "This is about Pa," he'd said, standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed and his jaw set. "About what Caleb did to him, to us. I'm not staying behind while you fight for his memory." So Thomas rode in his wagon bed with the evidence box, rifle across his knees, looking far older than 1380. The other children stayed with neighbors, the Morrison family, 40 miles west, who'd agreed to shelter them after Rowan explained the situation and promised payment they couldn't really afford. They reached Helena as the sun set on the second day. The territorial capital was everything Redemption wasn't: big, noisy, chaotic, with people who didn't know or care about ranch politics. They found lodging at a boarding house that didn't ask questions, and Rowan disappeared for 2 hours while Evelyn and Thomas ate tasteless stew and tried not to think about what came next. When Rowan returned, he had a name: Judge Marcus Holloway, federal appointee, not territorial, which means Caleb doesn't own him. He's hearing cases all week. We file our petition tomorrow morning and hope he grants us an emergency hearing. And if he doesn't, Evelyn asked, then we try the next judge and the next until someone listens or Caleb's men catch up with us. Rowan's face was haggard. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. One way or another, this ends in Helena. They filed the petition at dawn, standing in line with lawyers and clerks, and people whose legal problems seemed mundane compared to accusing one of the territory's wealthiest men of fraud and murder. The clerk who took their paperwork was a thin man with ink-stained fingers who barely glanced at the documents before stamping them and moving to the next person in line. "That's it?" Thomas asked as they left. "We just wait?" "We wait." Rowan guided them toward a restaurant across the street. Could be hours, could be days. Federal judges move at their own pace. It took 3 hours. They were finishing a late breakfast when a courier found them, a young boy who couldn't have been more than 10. "Judge Holloway wants to see you. Now. Says it's urgent." The judge's chambers were on the second floor of the courthouse, a wood-paneled room that smelled of pipe tobacco and old law books. Judge Holloway himself was nothing like Evelyn had imagined: small, bald, with glasses that magnified his eyes to unsettling size. But the way he looked at them as they entered suggested a sharp mind working behind that owlish appearance. "Mr. Creed, Mrs. Hart." He didn't stand or offer to shake hands. "I've read your petition. It makes extraordinary claims against a prominent citizen." "The claims are true." Rowan set the evidence box on the judge's desk. "Everything we need to prove it is in here." "So you say." Holloway opened the box, pulled out the first document, and began reading. His expression didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders suggested intense focus. He read for 20 minutes while Evelyn, Rowan, and Thomas stood in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Holloway set down the papers and removed his glasses, polishing them slowly. Where did you obtain these documents? Does it matter? Evelyn asked before Rowan could answer. It might. If they were obtained illegally, they may not be admissible as evidence. Then don't admit them as evidence. Just read them as a concerned citizen and tell me if what's written there doesn't demand investigation. Evelyn's voice was steady, despite the fear churning in her gut. My husband died because he wouldn't sell his land. Caleb Mercer had him killed, stole our property with forged documents, and has been doing the same thing to other ranchers for years. If the law won't help us because we broke into his house to prove it, then the law is broken. Holloway studied her for a long moment. You're either very brave or very foolish, Mrs. Hart. I'm a widow with 5 children who's already lost everything once. I don't have room for foolish anymore. Something that might have been respect flickered in the judge's eyes. He turned to Rowan. And you? What's your stake in this? I bought Mrs. Hart and her children at public auction after Mercer orchestrated their financial ruin. I own land Mercer wants, and I'm tired of watching powerful men destroy lives because they can. Rowan leaned forward. You're federal, which means you don't owe Caleb Mercer anything, so either help us or tell us now so we can try someone else before his men track us down. His men are already here, Holloway's voice was dry. Mr. Mercer arrived in Helena yesterday with his lawyer and 3 hired guns. He's claiming you broke into his home and stole valuable property. He's demanding your arrest. Evelyn's heart stopped. You're going to arrest us. I'm going to do my job, which is administer justice. Holloway put his glasses back on. But I'm also going to read every document in this box, verify what I can, and determine if there's merit to your claims. That will take time, a week, maybe more. In the meantime, you're free to move about Helena, but I strongly suggest you don't leave the city limits. Am I clear? Crystal, Rowan said. Good. Now get out of my chambers so I can work. And Mr. Creed, keep that boy out of trouble. He looks like he's 3 seconds from doing something that will land you all in a cell regardless of the evidence. Thomas's face went red, but he followed Evelyn and Rowan out without argument. The week that followed was the longest of Evelyn's life. They stayed at the boarding house, venturing out only for meals and supplies. Rowan hired a lawyer, a young man fresh from an Eastern law school, who charged less than the established firms, and seemed genuinely outraged by what he read in the documents. His name was Samuel Porter, and he had the kind of idealistic energy that made Evelyn both hopeful and worried he'd get himself killed. This is airtight, Samuel said during their first meeting, spreading documents across his rented office. The forgeries are obvious once you know what to look for. The ledger entries prove payment to corrupt officials. And your husband's diary. He looked at Evelyn with something like awe. Mrs. Hart, this is a first-hand account of systematic intimidation and conspiracy. If we can get this in front of a jury, Mercer is finished. If, Rowan said. Caleb's not going to let it get that far without a fight. The fight came on the 4th day. Evelyn was walking back from the general store with Thomas when a carriage pulled alongside them. The door opened and Caleb Mercer stepped out, looking every inch the gentleman in his tailored suit and polished boots. Mrs. Hart, what an unexpected pleasure. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And young Thomas, my, you've grown. Thomas's hand moved toward the knife at his belt, but Evelyn grabbed his wrist. Mr. Mercer, I'd say the pleasure is mutual, but we both know I'd be lying. Direct as ever. I admired that about your late husband, too. Caleb fell into step beside them, ignoring the way people stopped to stare. I hear you've been spreading some interesting stories about me. Not stories, facts. Facts acquired through breaking and entering. Theft. Crimes, Mrs. Hart, that could land you in prison for years. He paused at a street corner. But I'm a reasonable man. Return what you stole, drop this foolish legal action, and I'll consider not pressing charges. No. Evelyn's voice was flat. Think carefully. You have children to consider. What happens to them if you're in prison? If Mr. Creed is in prison? Caleb's smile widened. They'll end up right back where they started, on an auction block. Except this time, I'll make sure they're separated. Different families, different territories. You'll never see them again. Thomas lunged, and only Evelyn's grip on his arm stopped him from attacking a man twice his size in the middle of a crowded street. You son of a... Thomas, don't! Evelyn's voice was iron. She turned to Caleb. You're going to lose.
Judge Holloway is reviewing everything right now, the forgeries, the bribes, the evidence of Daniel's murder. You can't buy your way out of this.
Can I?
Caleb adjusted his cuffs. Judges are human, Mrs. Hart. They have families, ambitions, weaknesses, and I've had 48 hours to research Judge Holloway's particular vulnerabilities. He tipped his hat. Enjoy your stay in Helena. I suspect it will be brief. He climbed back into his carriage and rolled away, leaving Evelyn shaking with rage and fear. What did he mean? Thomas asked. About the judge's vulnerabilities? It means he's going to try to threaten or bribe him. Evelyn started walking again, faster now. We need to warn Holloway. But when they reached the courthouse, they found Judge Holloway's chambers locked and a clerk who informed them the judge had left for the day. Personal matter, the clerk said. Won't be back until tomorrow. Evelyn and Thomas returned to the boarding house to find Rowan pacing the tiny room like a caged animal. Something's wrong, he said immediately. One of the courthouse guards came by. Said Holloway left in a hurry, looked shaken. The guard thinks someone got to him. Caleb, Evelyn sank onto the narrow bed. He threatened me today. Said he'd researched Holloway's vulnerabilities. He's going to make the judge bury this. Then we force his hand. Rowan stopped pacing. Samuel can file for an emergency public hearing. Make this so visible, Holloway can't quietly make it disappear. Will that work? It's our only option. Samuel filed the motion the next morning, and by afternoon the entire territory knew about it. The Helena newspaper ran a front-page story. Widow accuses Baron of murder and fraud. By evening, people were gathering outside the courthouse, drawn by scandal and the promise of watching powerful men destroy each other. Judge Holloway granted the emergency hearing for the following morning. When Evelyn, Rowan, and Samuel arrived at the courthouse, they found the room packed to capacity. Ranchers who'd lost land to Caleb, families who'd been ruined by his business practices, townspeople who just wanted to see justice done or watch a good show. Caleb sat at the defendant's table with Thornton Webb and two other lawyers, looking supremely confident. When Evelyn entered, he smiled at her like they were old friends. Judge Holloway took the bench at 9 sharp, his expression unreadable behind those magnifying glasses. This court is now in session. We're here to address allegations of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy made by Mrs. Evelyn Hart against Mr. Caleb Mercer. He looked at Samuel. Counselor, you may present your case. What followed was 3 hours of methodical destruction. Samuel walked the court through every document, every forgery, every piece of evidence they'd stolen from Caleb's safe. He called witnesses. The surveyor who'd been bribed to falsify boundary lines, a former ranch hand who'd heard Caleb bragging about getting rid of Daniel Hart, a clerk from the land office who'd been paid to register fake deeds. Caleb's lawyers objected constantly, trying to exclude evidence based on how it was obtained, questioning witness credibility, throwing up legal roadblocks at every turn. But Samuel had done his homework, and he had the documents to back up every claim. The turning point came when Samuel introduced Daniel's diary. He read passages aloud, Daniel's own words describing meetings with Caleb, threats that were barely veiled, pressure to sell that escalated over months. My wife doesn't know how bad it's gotten, Daniel had written 3 weeks before he died. I don't want to frighten her, but Caleb Mercer is not a man who accepts no for an answer. I'm starting to think this won't end without blood. The courtroom was silent when Samuel finished reading. Even Caleb's lawyers had stopped objecting. The defense may present their case, Judge Holloway said. Thornton Webb stood slowly, smoothing his suit. Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman who's built his success through hard work and legal means. These accusations are based on stolen documents of questionable authenticity and the testimony of witnesses who've been paid or coerced. We haven't paid anyone, Samuel interjected. Haven't you? Thornton smiled. Mrs. Hart, how much is Mr. Creed paying you to make these accusations? Nothing. This isn't about money. Well, isn't it? You were destitute. Mr. Creed bought you at auction, essentially owns you and your children. Isn't it possible he's using you to attack a business rival? That's ridiculous. Is it? Mr. Creed, you paid $20,000 for Mrs. Hart and her children. That's an extraordinary sum. What did you expect in return? Rowan stood, his face dark with anger. I expected honest work. What I got was a family that didn't deserve what happened to them, and a chance to fight back against a man who's been stealing and killing for years. A convenient story. Thornton turned to the judge.
Your Honor, I submit that this entire case is a fabrication designed to destroy my client's reputation. The documents were stolen, possibly altered, the witnesses are suspect, and the accusers have clear financial and personal motives to lie. It went on for another hour, Thornton systematically attacking every piece of evidence, every witness, every claim. He was good at his job, Evelyn had to admit. By the time he finished, he'd planted enough doubt that some people in the courtroom were looking at her and Rowan with suspicion instead of sympathy. Judge Holloway called a recess. Evelyn, Rowan, Thomas, and Samuel huddled in a side room trying to assess the damage. "He's making us look like opportunists," Thomas said, his face flushed with anger. "Like we're just after Mercer's money. That's the strategy." Samuel was reviewing his notes frantically. "Discredit the accusers, cast doubt on the evidence, make the jury, or in this case, the judge, question everything." "What do we do?" Evelyn asked. "We need something unimpeachable, something Thornton can't spin or dismiss." Samuel looked up. "Mrs. Hart, is there anything else? Anything you haven't told me?" Evelyn thought about it, running through everything they'd taken from Caleb's safe, everything they'd discovered. And then she remembered something. "Constance," she said slowly. "Constance Mercer. She helped us. She told us where the documents were."
"She'll never testify," Rowan said immediately. "It would destroy her. Caleb would make sure of it." Maybe. Evelyn's mind was racing. But maybe she's tired of being destroyed slowly by staying silent. Maybe she wants out as much as we want justice. Samuel was already shaking his head. Even if she'd testify, Thornton would tear her apart. Vengeful wife trying to hurt her husband. He'd make her look hysterical or vindictive. Unless she has evidence he can't dismiss. Evelyn turned to Rowan. "You said Caleb's wife married him for money, that she looks the other way in exchange for comfort. What if she kept records, insurance, in case she ever needed to protect herself?" "That's a lot of assumptions," Rowan said. "It's all we've got." The recess ended before they could debate further. Judge Holloway retook the bench, and Evelyn found herself being called to testify. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye in the room on her. Samuel asked gentle questions, letting her tell her story in her own words. About Daniel, about the ranch, about the day they'd found him dead at the bottom of Copper Ridge, about Caleb's forged papers and the auction and watching her children nearly get separated because she couldn't pay debts she didn't owe. When Thornton's turn came, he wasn't gentle. "Mrs. Hart, you claim my client had your husband killed. Do you have any proof of this besides speculation and convenient diary entries?" "The diary entries are in my husband's handwriting, which Mr. Creed could have forced you to forge as part of this elaborate scheme." "That's insane. Why wouldn't you? You were desperate, destitute. Mr. Creed offered you security in exchange for helping him destroy a rival. That's not justice, Mrs. Hart. That's conspiracy." "My husband is dead because your client wanted our land." Evelyn's voice cracked. "He stole everything from us, and now you're sitting here trying to make me sound like a criminal for fighting back?" "I'm trying to establish the truth, which seems flexible in your testimony." Thornton's smile was cold. "No further questions." Evelyn returned to her seat feeling like she'd been flayed alive. Thomas reached for her hand and she gripped it like a lifeline. The hearing continued through the afternoon. More witnesses, more testimony, more legal maneuvering. By the time Judge Holloway called another recess at 5 o'clock, everyone was exhausted and no one knew which way the decision would fall. "We're losing," Samuel said bluntly when they reconvened in the side room. "Thornton's done too good a job planting doubt. Unless we have something else, something decisive, Holloway's going to rule there's insufficient evidence to proceed." "What about Constance?" Evelyn asked. "Did anyone try to reach her?" "She's staying at the Grand Hotel. I sent a messenger, but she refused to see him." Samuel ran his hands through his hair. "I'm sorry. I thought we had enough." "We do have enough." Rowan's voice was quiet but firm. "We have the truth. Sometimes that has to be sufficient." But Evelyn wasn't ready to give up. She stood abruptly. "Where's the Grand Hotel?" 3 blocks west. But Mrs. Hart, if she wouldn't see my messenger, she'll see me." Evelyn was already moving toward the door. "Stay here. I'll be back in an hour." "Evelyn?" Rowan started to follow, but she held up a hand. "Alone. Woman to woman. It's the only way." She left before anyone could argue,
walking through Helena's evening streets with her heart hammering and no clear plan beyond desperation. The Grand Hotel was exactly what its name suggested: ostentatious, expensive, the kind of place where people like Caleb Mercer stayed when they wanted everyone to know how important they were. The clerk at the desk was polite but firm. "Mrs. Mercer is not receiving visitors. Tell her Evelyn Hart needs to speak with her about what happened at her house, about the choice she made to help us." Evelyn leaned forward. "Tell her I'm not asking for testimony. I'm asking for a conversation." The clerk disappeared upstairs. 5 minutes later, he returned. "Room 304. She'll give you 10 minutes. Constance answered the door herself, still dressed in an evening gown despite the hour. She looked older than she had that night in Caleb's study, the lamplight less kind than Evelyn remembered. "You shouldn't have come here," Constance said, but she stepped aside to let Evelyn enter. The room was luxurious, thick carpets, heavy drapes, furniture that probably cost more than the ranch house. Constance poured herself a drink from a crystal decanter and didn't offer one to Evelyn. "I can't testify," she said before Evelyn could speak. "Whatever you're going to ask, the answer is no." "I'm not here to ask you to testify." Evelyn remained standing. "I'm here to tell you that you were right. That night, when you said you were tired of being a coward, you were right." Constance's laugh was bitter. "And what good did it do? Caleb knows I helped you. He hasn't confronted me directly, but he knows. I've seen the way he looks at me. I'm living on borrowed time. Then why not finish what you started?" Evelyn moved closer. "You gave us the documents, but Caleb's lawyers are making us look like criminals and opportunists. They're going to win because people believe men like Caleb over women like us. But if you spoke up, if you told the truth, I'd be destroyed, publicly humiliated, probably declared unfit and committed to an asylum. Don't look shocked. It's what men do to wives who become inconvenient." Constance drained her glass. "I helped you because I was tired, not because I was brave. There's a difference." "Is there?" Evelyn's voice was soft. "Because it looked like bravery to me. Standing in that study, telling us where to find the truth, even though it could ruin you. That wasn't cowardice. It was self-preservation. If Caleb goes down, I get his money. I'll be free and rich." Constance poured another drink. "That's not noble. That's calculated. I don't care about your motives. I care about my children, about the ranch my husband died for, about stopping Caleb before he destroys more families." Evelyn's voice broke. "I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to be honest. One time in public, where it matters." Constance was silent for a long moment, staring into her glass like it held answers. "What would I even say? That my husband is a monster and I've known for years and done nothing? That will make me look worse, not better. Say that you were afraid. Say that you're afraid now, but you're doing it anyway." Evelyn moved to the window, looking out at Helena's lit streets. "Say that you're tired of powerful men getting away with destroying lives because people like us are too scared to stop them. And if I do, and Caleb still wins, what then? Then at least we tried. At least we stood up and said, this isn't right. This isn't justice. This can't continue." Evelyn turned back. "Your husband had my husband killed. He stole our home, tried to separate my children, and is currently in that courthouse lying to a judge while his lawyers make me sound like a criminal. If you do nothing, you're part of that. If you speak up, you're part of stopping it." Constance set down her glass with a sharp click. "You're manipulating me." "Yes, because I'm desperate and out of options, and I need your help." Evelyn didn't apologize. "So I'm asking, will you help us? Not for me, not for my children, but because somewhere inside you remember what it felt like to have principles that mattered more than comfort." The silence stretched so long Evelyn was sure she'd failed. Then Constance stood, moved to her wardrobe, and pulled out a small leather case. Inside were papers, letters, documents that made Evelyn's heart race just looking at them. "I did keep records," Constance said. "Insurance, like you guessed. Every shady deal, every bribe, every threat Caleb made in my hearing over the years. I thought someday I might need them to negotiate my freedom. I suppose someday is today." She handed the case to Evelyn. "Tell your lawyer I'll testify tomorrow." "But Mrs. Hart, if this goes wrong, if Caleb wins despite everything, I want you to know I expect him to kill me. Not quickly, not obviously, but eventually. And I'm doing this anyway because you're right. I am tired of being part of the problem." Evelyn took the case with shaking hands. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won. Constance walked her to the door. But maybe, if we're very lucky and the judge is actually honest, we'll get to see Caleb Mercer face consequences for once in his miserable life. That would be something, wouldn't it? That would be everything. Evelyn ran back to the courthouse, the leather case clutched to her chest. She found Rowan and Samuel still in the side room, looking defeated. When she burst through the door, they both jumped to their feet.
Constance will testify tomorrow, Evelyn said breathlessly. And she has more evidence, years' worth. Everything Caleb's done, documented. Samuel grabbed the case, flipping it open and scanning the contents. His eyes went wide. Mrs. Hart, this is devastating. Financial records showing payments to officials, letters discussing eliminating competition, ledgers tracking illegal deals. With Constance's testimony to authenticate it, we have him, Rowan finished. He was looking at Evelyn with something like awe. You actually convinced her. I reminded her she's better than she thought she was. Evelyn sank into a chair, exhausted. Now we just have to hope the judge agrees. The next morning, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread that something big was happening, and people crammed into every available space. Caleb arrived with his legal team, still confident, still smiling. He didn't know what was coming. Judge Holloway called the court to order, and Samuel stood immediately. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Constance Mercer to testify. The courtroom erupted. Caleb's face went white, then red. Thornton was on his feet, objecting before Constance even entered, but Holloway overruled him. Constance walked to the witness stand in a simple gray dress. No jewelry, no ornamentation. She looked small and frightened and absolutely determined. Samuel established her identity and relationship to Caleb, then asked simply, Mrs. Mercer, why are you here today? Because I'm tired of lying. Constance's voice was quiet but clear. My husband is guilty of everything Mrs. Hart has accused him of and worse. I've known for years and said nothing because I was comfortable and afraid. But I can't stay silent anymore. What followed was 2 hours of devastating testimony. Constance detailed deals she'd overheard, threats Caleb had made, conversations about eliminating Daniel Hart and making it look like an accident. She authenticated documents from her personal records, explaining when and where each one was created. She remained calm, even when Thornton tried to rattle her, answering every question with quiet certainty. You expect us to believe you kept all these records without your husband knowing? Thornton demanded during cross-examination. I'm his wife, not his accountant. He never checked what I filed away in my personal papers. Constance met his eyes steadily. And yes, I kept them as insurance. Call it cowardice or calculation, but the result is the same. I have proof of everything. By the time she finished, Caleb looked like he wanted to strangle her. His lawyers were frantically whispering, but there was nothing they could do. Constance had burned her marriage and her comfortable life to tell the truth, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Judge Holloway called a final recess to review all the evidence. An hour later, he returned with a decision that would change everything. I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented over the past 2 days, Holloway began. The accusations made against Mr. Mercer are serious and supported by substantial documentation and credible witness testimony. While the evidence was obtained through questionable means, its authenticity is not in doubt. The forgeries are obvious, the bribes are documented, and the conspiracy is clear. He looked directly at Caleb. Mr. Mercer, I'm ruling against you on all counts. The land deeds you claim are invalid and fraudulent. The original property boundaries will be restored. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the Territorial Marshal for criminal investigation into charges of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. The courtroom exploded. People shouted, some in joy, some in anger. Caleb was on his feet, his face purple with rage, screaming something that was lost in the chaos. Thornton was trying to file objections, but Holloway's gavel cracked down like thunder. Order! I will have order in this court. When the noise finally died down, Holloway continued. Mrs. Hart, your property is restored to you effective immediately. Mr. Creed, the disputed 40 acres remain yours by right. And both of you, he paused, his expression stern. Don't ever break into anyone's house again, regardless of the reason. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Good. This court is adjourned. Evelyn sat frozen in her seat, unable to quite believe it was over.
They'd won. Actually won. The ranch was hers again. Daniel's death would be investigated, and Caleb Mercer's empire was crumbling in real time. Thomas grabbed her in a fierce hug. Then Rowan was there, and Samuel and people she didn't even know were congratulating her, shaking her hand, telling her she'd done something important. Outside the courthouse, Constance stood alone, watching her husband being led away by the marshal. When she saw Evelyn, she smiled sadly. "Thank you," Evelyn said, "for everything." "Don't thank me. I should have done this years ago." Constance pulled her shawl tighter. "I'll be leaving Helena. Going east, I think, where no one knows me. Maybe I'll find a way to live with myself." "I think you just did." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "You were brave today." "I was terrified today. But I suppose that's what bravery is, isn't it? Being terrified and doing it anyway." Constance looked back at the courthouse. "Good luck, Mrs. Hart. Build something good on that land. Make your husband's death mean something." She walked away and Evelyn never saw her again. But sometimes, years later, she'd think about the woman who'd risked everything to tell the truth, and she'd hope Constance found peace somewhere far from Montana's harsh country and complicated past. They collected the children from the Morrisons the next day, and the reunion was joyful chaos. Clara cried. Margaret demanded a full accounting of everything that happened. James just held on to Evelyn and wouldn't let go. And Thomas tried to act tough but failed completely when his mother told him they were going home, to their real home, the ranch Daniel had built. The ride back took longer because they stopped at their old property first. The house was still standing, weathered but solid. Caleb had seized it but never bothered to improve or maintain it, so it looked much as they'd left it the day of the auction. "Can we live here again?" Clara asked, running her hands along the porch railing. "Someday, maybe." Evelyn looked at Rowan, who stood apart from the family reunion, watching with that careful distance. "But I think we've built something at the ranch up north, something worth keeping." "That's your choice," Rowan said. "This land is yours now. You can do whatever you want with it." "What I want—" Evelyn stopped, suddenly unsure how to finish. What did she want? Justice was done. Their land restored. Technically, she and the children could return to their old life, rebuild what had been taken. But that life was gone. Daniel was gone. And in the months they'd spent at Rowan's ranch, they'd built something new. Something that felt like it might be worth more than just reclaiming the past. "What I want," she started again, "is to talk about this. About what comes next. But maybe somewhere warmer than a burned-out ranch in October wind." They rode north as the sun set. 6 people who'd started as strangers and become something else entirely. The ranch appeared in the valley like welcome home, smoke rising from chimneys, cattle grazing peacefully, everything exactly as they'd left it, but somehow more important now. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn found Rowan on the porch, staring at the stars. "Thank you," she said, sitting beside him, "for everything, for buying us, for teaching us, for fighting with us, for believing we were worth the risk." "You were always worth it." Rowan's voice was rough. "You and those kids. You reminded me why I built this place." "Rowan," Evelyn took a breath. "We could go back to Daniel's ranch, fix it up, start over. That was always the plan, right? Get our land back and return to normal. Is that what you want?" "I don't know." It was the truth. "Part of me wants to honor Daniel's memory by rebuilding what he started, but another part recognizes that life is gone. We're different now. The children are different. And this place," she gestured at the ranch, "it feels like home in a way I wasn't expecting." "Then stay." Rowan said it quietly, like he was afraid the words would shatter if spoken too loud. "Keep your property. Use it however you want. But stay here, you and the kids, as family, not employees." "Family," Evelyn repeated. "If you want." He looked at her finally, and his winter sky eyes were vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I'm not good at this, at connection, at letting people in. But you and those children, you've already in, and I don't want to go back to the way it was before, to being alone." Evelyn thought about Daniel, about the life they'd planned and the dreams they'd shared. Thought about the ranch he'd built with his own hands and the legacy he'd wanted to leave. And she thought about Rowan, the strange, silent man who'd paid a fortune for strangers and somehow became the person she trusted most in the world. "I don't want to replace him," she said carefully. "Daniel was my husband, the father of my children. What we had was real.
I know. I'm not asking you to forget him. Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness. I'm asking if maybe there's room for something new alongside the memory. Something that honors what was while building what could be. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even a declaration. It was just an honest question from a man who'd learned to be alone and was asking if maybe he didn't have to be anymore. Evelyn squeezed his hand and thought about how far they'd come from that frozen auction platform. About justice won and families rebuilt, and futures reclaimed from men who'd tried to steal them. Yes, she said finally, there's room. And somewhere in the darkness, in the house they'd defended together and the land they'd fought for, 5 children slept safely, dreaming of better tomorrows that were finally within reach.
The decision to stay didn't make everything simple. Victories in court didn't automatically translate to peace, and Caleb Mercer's reach extended beyond prison walls. In November, 3 of their best cattle disappeared, found shot and rotting in a ravine a week later. A message that was clear even without proof. "He's in jail," Evelyn said. "How is he still doing this? He has people loyal to him. People who think we destroyed a great man instead of stopping a criminal." Rowan watched the valley like enemies might materialize from the snow. "We won the legal battle. Now we fight the aftermath." The aftermath included whispers in town, merchants suddenly unable to sell to them, the bank in redemption refusing their accounts. And twice, riders passed through at night, not doing anything illegal, just making sure they were being watched. But the external problems weren't the only challenge. Thomas, now 14 and convinced he was a man, had started questioning Rowan's authority with small challenges that added up. "Why check the north fence again?" Thomas asked one morning. "We just checked it 3 days ago." "Because checking it is how you know it's still good." Rowan's patience was wearing thin. "You want to wait until cattle get loose?" "I want to not waste time on busy work when there's real work to be done. Back when Pa ran our ranch—" "Your Pa's ranch had 50 head and 100 acres, Rowan interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. "This ranch has 200 head and 1,200 acres. The scale is different. If you can't see that, you're not as grown as you think." Thomas's face went red. "Don't talk about my father like you know what he would have done." "You're right. I didn't know him." Rowan set down the bridle he'd been repairing. "But I've been running this ranch for years. You've been here 8 months, so either trust my judgment or tell me you can't work under these conditions. Your choice." Thomas grabbed his coat and stalked out. After he left, Rowan sagged, looking older and more tired. "I'm handling this wrong," he said. "No, you're handling it like a father." Evelyn touched his arm. "He's testing boundaries. It's what boys his age do." "I don't know how to be a father to a teenage boy who's angry at the world." "Neither did Daniel. Thomas was only 10 when Daniel died." Evelyn's voice was gentle. "You're doing fine. He just needs time to accept that having you in his life doesn't mean betraying his father's memory." The situation came to a head 2 weeks later when Thomas took the wagon for supplies and didn't return. They found him 3 miles from home at midnight, sitting beside the intact wagon, staring at nothing. "What happened?" Evelyn demanded. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. I just couldn't come home." Thomas looked up, his face wet with tears. "Every time I come back to that ranch, I feel like I'm betraying Pa. Like I'm choosing you over him. And I know that's stupid. I know Pa's dead, but I can't make myself stop feeling it." Rowan dismounted and came to stand in front of Thomas. "Your father built you a life, not a prison. He worked himself half to death so you'd have options, chances. You think he'd want you frozen in grief, refusing to move forward because it feels like abandoning him? You didn't know him, but I know what it's like to lose someone and feel like moving on means forgetting them. When Sarah and William died, I spent 2 years barely living because living without them felt like betrayal." Rowan's voice was rough. "But they mattered enough that Sarah would have kicked my ass for wasting years wallowing. Your father sounds like the kind of man who'd feel the same way. How do I stop feeling like I'm choosing wrong?" "You stopped thinking of it as a choice. You had a father who loved you and died too soon. That's a tragedy, not a debt you have to pay forever." Rowan crouched to Thomas's level. "Accepting me doesn't erase him. There's room for both." Thomas broke then, crying in a way Evelyn hadn't seen since the funeral. Rowan pulled him into an awkward hug while Evelyn stood back and cried too, watching 2 broken people try to figure out how to be family. Winter settled in hard, trapping them inside for days at a time. 7 people in close quarters should have been unbearable. Instead, it became when they finally started feeling like a real family. James taught Margaret chess. Clara learned to read on Rowan's lap. Thomas and Rowan planned ranch expansions. And Evelyn found herself managing a household that had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. "You look happy," Rowan said one evening after the children were in bed. "I am happy. I didn't think I would be again after Daniel died. Sarah's been gone 10 years, and sometimes I still wake up reaching for her." Rowan stared into the fire. "But I've learned it can coexist with being happy now. It's not one or the other." "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just old enough to have made every mistake." He reached for her hand. "Evelyn, marry me. Not because you have to, but because I love you and I want to build the rest of my life with you, as partners, as equals, as family." "I love Daniel," she said carefully. "I always will. I don't want to erase him. I want to honor him by taking care of the family he loved." Rowan's thumb traced circles on her palm. "We can hang his picture, tell stories, make sure the children remember. But I also want to build something new, something that's ours." "Yes." The word came out before Evelyn fully processed it. "Yes, I'll marry you." They told the children the next morning. Clara was ecstatic. Margaret asked practical questions. James smiled quietly. Thomas went silent. "Is this what you want?" Thomas asked his mother. "Really want?" "It's what I want. I know it's complicated, but I need to move forward with my life. We all do." Thomas looked at Rowan, assessing. "You'll be good to her? To all of us?" "I'll try. I'll fail sometimes because I'm human, but I'll always try." "Then I guess it's okay." Thomas managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Congratulations, Mama." They married in April beneath the massive oak tree, with neighboring families in attendance, people who'd decided Rowan and Evelyn had proven themselves worth supporting. Samuel Porter came from Helena with news that Caleb had been sentenced to 10 years for fraud, 5 for conspiracy, and would be poor when he got out. The ceremony was simple, no fancy dress or elaborate decorations, just promises to build a life together with all the complications that entailed. "I take you as my husband," Evelyn said, "with my history and my children and my grief alongside my hope, with the understanding that we're both broken in ways that won't fully heal, but maybe together we're a little less broken than apart. I take you as my wife, knowing I'm getting your children too, knowing I'll never replace Daniel, but hoping I can be something good alongside his memory," Rowan responded. "I promise our life won't be perfect, but it'll be real." The neighbors cheered and they celebrated with a meal on the porch, roasted venison and fresh bread and dancing to a fiddle someone produced. Watching her children laugh and play, watching Rowan dance with Clara, watching the sun set over the valley they'd fought so hard to keep, Evelyn felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Not simple happiness, but contentment, peace. The years that followed weren't easy. Ranch life never was. But the children grew into themselves. Thomas took over ranch responsibilities, eventually becoming Rowan's true partner. At 21, he married a teacher's daughter from Helena and built a house on the eastern edge of the property. Margaret discovered a gift for numbers and law. At 18, she moved to Helena to study, determined no other family should suffer what hers had. She returned 5 years later with a law degree and fierce determination to represent ranchers against powerful men who thought money made them untouchable. James never left the ranch, content with horses and open sky. He developed a breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in the territory, eventually marrying a widow with 2 children. Clara grew into a beautiful young woman who married a rancher's son 50 miles south, though she visited often and wrote letters that kept Evelyn connected to her youngest daughter's life. And the ranch grew. With Thomas and James working alongside Rowan, they expanded to 500 head across 2,000 acres, building new barns and developing a reputation for honest dealing that brought business even from people who'd initially sided with Caleb. Evelyn kept the books, managed the household, and eventually started a small school for ranch children in the valley. 8 students taught in her kitchen, learning reading and arithmetic from a woman who believed education was the best insurance against being victimized by those with more power. "You're running yourself ragged," Rowan told her one evening. "I'm doing what needs doing. The Martinez children can't get to town school. It's too far. If I can teach them, maybe they'll have options their father never had." "You're trying to save everyone." I'm trying to prevent what happened to us from happening to anyone else. She looked at him. Is that so wrong? It's not wrong. You just can't fix everything. Maybe, but I have to try. It was an argument they'd had variations of for years. Rowan, who'd learned to accept limitations, Evelyn, who kept pushing against them. Neither convinced the other, but they learned to support each other anyway. 10 years after the wedding, word came that Caleb Mercer had died in prison. Evelyn felt nothing when she read it. No satisfaction, no grief, just distant acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. Does it matter to you? Rowan asked.
I thought it would. But he took so much from us, and now he's gone, and it doesn't give us back what was lost. Daniel's still dead. Caleb dying doesn't undo any of it. But it means he can't hurt anyone else. Maybe justice isn't about evening scores. It's about stopping the damage from spreading. They buried the letter and didn't speak of Caleb again.
20 years after the auction block, Evelyn and Rowan sat on their porch, older and grayer but still together. The valley had filled with family, Thomas's house to the east, James's to the west, frequent visits from Margaret and Clara with their own children. 20 years, Evelyn said, watching her grandchildren play. Hard to believe sometimes. You ever think about that day? When I rode into town and saw you on that platform? Sometimes. I think about how scared I was, how certain my life was over. She leaned against him. I think about how wrong I was. You weren't wrong to be scared, but I was wrong about it being the end. It was a beginning. Evelyn watched her granddaughter climb the oak tree where she'd married Rowan. We built something good from something terrible. We took the worst day of our lives and turned it into a life worth living, Rowan agreed. We proved powerful men don't always win, that families can be built from ruins, that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. When did you become a philosopher? When I got old enough to see patterns instead of chaos. He smiled. We did good, Evelyn. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. Children laughing, horses whinnying, Thomas calling in cattle. This was the life they'd built. Not perfect, never easy, but theirs. Built from courage and stubbornness and refusal to let tragedy be the final word. Tell me the story again, Clara's daughter called from the oak tree. About how you and Grandpa met. The grandchildren gathered on the porch, 5 of them, ranging from 6 to 12. Evelyn began the way she always did. Once upon a time, there was a widow who'd lost everything and children who were about to be separated, and a man who paid a fortune for strangers because it was the right thing to do. She told them about the auction block and the frozen town square and the moment when a stranger changed their lives. About the hard first winter, growing trust, the battle against a man who thought power made him untouchable. About breaking into houses and courtroom wars and proving truth matters. And she told them about family, how sometimes the people you're meant to build your life with aren't the ones you expect. How love can grow in strange circumstances. How choosing to stay is sometimes braver than choosing to run. Grandma, were you scared when Grandpa bought you? Her oldest grandchild asked. Terrified. I thought I was trading one prison for another, but he gave us safety, and we gave him purpose. That's what family does. We fill in each other's broken places, even when the family's not related by blood? Especially then. Blood doesn't make family. Choice makes family. Showing up makes family. Evelyn gathered them close. Your grandfather chose us when he didn't have to. We chose him back, and every day since we've chosen each other. That's what matters. The children eventually scattered, called away for supper. Evelyn and Rowan remained as darkness fell. That was a good story, Rowan said. It's a true story. That makes it better. Think they understand what you're trying to teach them? Maybe. But someday when they face impossible situations, maybe they'll remember their grandmother survived an auction block and built a life anyway. Maybe that'll give them courage. She leaned her head on his shoulder. That's all we can hope for. That our struggles mean something to the people who come after. Your struggles meant something to me. You walked onto that platform with your head high and reminded me what real strength looks like. And you rode into town when you had no reason to care about strangers and changed our entire future. She kissed his cheek. We're a team, Rowan creed. 20 years and counting. They sat together as stars emerged, as the ranch settled into nightly rhythms, as the life they'd built continued around them. Not perfect, because perfect was impossible, but good, Honest, real. This was what they'd fought for. Not wealth or status or traditional success, just a family that worked, a ranch that thrived, and love that had grown deep roots in hard soil. The worst day of Evelyn's life had led her here. If someone had told her on that frozen February morning that she'd find peace and purpose in being auctioned like property, she'd have thought them insane. But life rarely made sense in the moment. You could only see the patterns looking back. "I love you," Evelyn said, because sometimes the simplest truths were the most important. "I love you too. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a broken man who didn't know how to ask for what he needed. Thank you for seeing a family on an auction block and deciding they deserved better." Inside, someone started playing piano, Claire's daughter, practicing pieces Evelyn had been teaching her. The music was halting, imperfect, but earnest. "She's getting better," Rowan observed. "She practices every day. She reminds me of Margaret at that age. So determined." "Our children turned out well," Rowan said. "They did," Evelyn smiled. "All of them." The night deepened, and eventually they went inside, leaving the porch to darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. But for now, they had this: each other, their family, their hard-won peace. They had proved auction blocks don't define destinies, that powerful men can be defeated, that families can be built from the most unlikely foundations. They had survived. More than survived. They had thrived. Evelyn climbed the stairs to the bedroom she shared with the man who'd bought her freedom and accidentally given her back her life. Behind her, the house full of family continued its evening routines. She thought about Daniel sometimes, wondered what he'd think of how everything turned out. She liked to believe he'd be proud of the children he'd raised, of the wife who refused to break, of the man who'd stepped into an impossible situation and made it work. But mostly she thought about tomorrow and all the days stretching ahead, about grandchildren to spoil and a ranch to run and a partner to grow old beside, about a life that had started in the worst possible way and become something she'd never trade. "Coming to bed?" Rowan called. "In a minute," Evelyn answered, taking one last look at her home, at the proof that terrible beginnings could lead to beautiful ends. Then she turned off the lights and joined her husband, ready for whatever tomorrow brought, secure in the knowledge they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The family nobody expected, but everyone, especially the 7 people who built it, desperately needed.